What is going on, guys? Welcome back. This video today is a full Flask course combined into a single video. It covers everything from the very basics of Flask, like working with HTML files, rendering templates, handling post requests, working with files, working with static files, integrating Bootstrap, to more advanced concepts like sessions and cookies, database interaction, user authentication, up until stuff like blueprints and even deployment in Docker. So this is a very comprehensive course, and it consists of 10 individual videos compiled into one big course. So oftentimes you will hear me referring to the previous episode or to the next episode. In this case, I just mean earlier or future points in the video. So don't be confused by that. And I do this because most of you guys prefer to have one big course instead of 10 individual episodes. So this is now the full Flask course on the Neural 9 channel. As I said, it's quite comprehensive, so you might want to split it up into multiple sessions. But yeah, let's get right into it. I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so we're going to start in this first episode today by creating our first simple Flask application, a simple Hello World application, just to get to know the process of creating and running a Flask app. So it's going to be very beginner friendly and simple. Now, as I already mentioned, Flask is a Python web development framework, and it's oftentimes also referred to as a micro framework or a micro web framework because it's so simple and minimalistic. Compared to something like Django, when you create a new Flask application, you don't have any functionality out of the box. You don't have an authentication system or anything like that. You basically have to implement everything from scratch, or you have to install additional packages that implement the functionality. We're not going to go into the advantages and disadvantages. We're not going to compare here Django versus Flask. We're going to go into Flask, but it's important to know that Flask is very simple and minimalistic. You can basically build an application with a single file. You don't have some project structure that has to be in place in order to run a simple Hello World project. We're going to see that this is the case in a second here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a virtual environment. And the reason you want to create a virtual environment is because you want to have an isolated project where you only have the packages and also the package versions that are relevant to this particular project. There are many reasons you want to do that, but one reason is that it's very convenient to then create a requirements.txt file, to then deploy the application, to containerize it, and so on. But there are also other benefits. So what we're going to do first is we're going to open up a command line. So on Windows, CMD, on Linux and Mac, the terminal, and we're going to navigate to the directory that we're going to be working in. In my case, this is the current directory, and here now we're going to create our Flask project directory. So we're just going to create a directory. I'm going to call it now first app, and in this directory here, in this first app directory, we're going to create a virtual environment. For this, you don't need to install any Python packages. This is something that works with Python out of the box. It's part of the core Python installation. And what we need to do is we need to say Python or Python 3, depending on your operating system, -m-venv, and then the name of the virtual environment directory. I like to call it .venv, which makes it a hidden directory. And once you have this, once this is created, you can see that we have this virtual environment here. And depending on your IDE, depending on the editor that you're using, you will have to configure that now the environment that is being used is this environment, because by default, it's going to use the environment it always uses. In my case here, in PyCharm, what I have to do is I have to click here on the Python interpreter, and I have to, oh, actually, I'm blocking this with my camera. Let me just move this for a second. I have to click on the Python version down here. I have to add a new interpreter, a local interpreter, and then basically I have to go to virtual env environment existing, and then I basically have to look for this. So I have to, in this case, I have my prepared projects here. I have to go to Python current venv bin, and then I want to use Python 3. This is the executable or the binary I'm interested in. I click on this, I click OK, and now my PyCharm uses this virtual environment. In addition to that, the terminal that I want to use, I also want to activate this environment in. So I want to say source, at least on Linux and Mac, source, and then .venv bin, and then activate. And now you can see it's using the venv environment. How can you check if this is actually working? You can just type pip or pip3 freeze, and you're going to get a list of all the packages that are installed. In this case, no packages installed. Now, once you have the virtual environment running and activated, what you can do, or what you have to do, is you have to install Flask. So pip or pip3 install Flask, and then this is going to install everything that's needed for a basic Flask application. I can run pip freeze again, and now you can see I have a couple of packages here installed in this environment. So after this, what we want to do is we want to create a Python file called app.py. And this is actually all we're going to need for this video today. We don't need any directory structure. We don't need models. We don't need anything like that. We can just have a simple Python file, and this is going to be our whole application. Of course, when you build more complex projects, you still have a directory structure, you have templates, you have blueprints, and so on. We're going to talk about this in future episodes. But for a simple Flask application, one file is enough. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to import from Flask, Flask with a capital F. So from Flask, import Flask, and then we're going to create the application by saying app equals Flask, and we're going to pass here underscore underscore name underscore underscore. So this is how you create the application. And now what we do with this application is we add endpoints, or routes, you could say. We're going to talk about routes in the next episode, but for this video, we're going to just create a simple default route, a simple index route. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the decorator, so at app.route, and we're going to specify the rule, so basically the path that this route is going to belong to, and the default is just slash. So app route slash, and then below that we want to create a function that is going to return something, which is what we're going to see, the HTML code we're going to see when we go to that endpoint. So here we're going to say now def to create a new function, index, and here you can return something. Now later on we're going to render HTML templates, we're going to do it professionally, but for now you can just return any text. You can just return hello world, for example. And this is what you're going to see when you go to that specific endpoint. Now this is now the endpoint. To actually run the application, what we're going to do is we're going to say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals underscore underscore main underscore underscore. That's just the basic Python main section. What we're going to do here is we're going to say app.run, and we can provide a couple of parameters here. The three important parameters that we're going to provide here are the host, the port, and whether we want to run this in debug mode or not. So we can say host equals, and what you want to do is you always want to run the application on the local host, so on the host of the machine. Not necessarily on localhost, but on the local IP address. So if you're running this on a server, you can provide the IP address that you can find with the terminal. So for example, something like 192.168 and so on. Or you can provide localhost if you just want to run this locally, or you can provide both by passing 0000. This is going to basically use the local IP address and localhost, so you can keep it simple and just provide this. And then you can also provide a port. I'm not sure what the default port is. We can actually see what the default port is. And then you want to provide debug equals true. Now you don't want to provide debug equals true when you're actually running this on a server, when you're actually deploying this. But while you're developing this application, you want to run it in debug mode, because then you don't have to constantly restart the server. You can just keep it running, change the code, and it's going to update automatically. And you're also going to see the error messages and stuff like that. But you want to turn this to false once you deploy the application. So right now I can just run this. I think the default port is 5000. But we can also change this. For example, you can say port equals 5555 if you want to. And then you can run this. And you can see it's running now on localhost and also on the private IP address. And when I click on this, it will open up a web browser. And this web browser goes automatically to the default route slash, and I get hello world as an output here. And you can, of course, also change this to be HTML code. So you can say here H1 and then H1. And then this is going to, when you save this, it will update because you're running this in debug mode. I can click on it and you can see now I have a heading here. So this is the basic idea of a simple Flask application. What we're going to do now in the next episodes is we're going to add more routes. We're going to handle different types of requests. We're going to add dynamic routes. We're going to add post requests and status codes and templates and blueprints and all that. But this is where it all starts. This is the simple, basic Hello World application in Flask. And of course, what you can also do is you can run this in the terminal. So you can just say python3 app.py. This also works. And just as one thing up front, you can now take all the packages. Let's say this is now your application. You want to deploy it somewhere. All you have to do, for example, to push it to GitHub so that people can use it, you want to do something like pip3 freeze. And then you want to pipe this with the greater than sign, with the closing angle bracket. You want to feed this into a requirements.txt file, and when you have that, you have this requirements.txt file, and then people can just go ahead and say pip3 install -r requirements.txt, and they can install all the packages that you have installed in this particular virtual environment. All right, so let us briefly recap what we did up until this point. We created a virtual environment for our application so that we only have the packages that are relevant to this project that we're building here. And we created this simple Hello World application in Flask. The idea is we import from Flask, Flask with a capital F, we create an application, and then we add this index function, which just returns Hello World as a heading. This is just some HTML code here. And then we map this index function to the default route /. And then all we have to do is we have to run the application with the host 0000, which is automatically localhost, and also the private local IP address. Then we also customize the port to be 5555, and we set debug to true, which has the effect of us not having to constantly restart the application to make changes or to apply changes. It happens when we change the code, and we also see the error messages instead of something like internal server error without any context. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to learn about routes. We're going to learn how to handle different types of URLs, so how to handle dynamic URLs, also how to handle URL parameters, and we're going to learn about the different types of requests like post and get and put and so on. And we're going to also learn how to return custom status codes. So let us start with a very simple thing first. Let's just add another endpoint here which has a different route. So we can say here another function, let's say hello, and this function will also return just a simple hello world, maybe not as a heading this time. What we can do easily is we can just say app.route, and the route can be something like /hello. The important thing is every route has to start with a /, so you have to say / and then something, and you can call this route whatever you want. You can call it hello, you can call it hello world, you can call it ABC, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't even have to match the name of the function. So I can call the route XYZ and I can call the function hello. This is also fine. And by doing that, you can basically add as many endpoints as you want. So what you have to do is you have to run the application, and then you can just say /hello, and then you will get to this endpoint that is mapped to the function, or that the function is mapped to. Now, this is all static, so I can add a bunch of those and they're always going to be the same. However, what I can also do is I can add certain or so-called URL processors. So I can have variables in the URL itself that I can handle in the function. So for example, what I can do is I can create an endpoint here, a route, which I can call /greet. And then what I can do is I can add a name here. So I can say I want to greet a certain name, and how I can do that is I can use angle brackets to specify name here. So now it's not greet and then /angle brackets name. This is not the endpoint, but name is now a variable that can be dynamic. So I can say greet Mike, greet Bob, or something like this. And the way I handle this is I create a function, and the function takes the parameter name. So in this case, what I could do is I could say fstring hello and then name. So the idea is now in the URL itself, I have the parameter name, and I can go to the route greet /Mike, and I would get a different response than when I go to greet /Bob, for example. And we can see that this is the case by just going to /greet /Mike, and there you go. Hello Mike /greet /Bob. hello Bob. So this is what is called a URL processor. Now, there are certain things that we can add to these URL processors. So for example, if I have a route, let's call it add, so /add, and what I have here is number 1 and number 2. Then what I can do is I can define the function add, which takes the parameters number 1, number 2. But you're going to notice something if I return, for example, an f string saying number 1 plus number 2 is equal to number 1 plus number 2. What you will notice is that when we go to the application and I actually go to add/10/20, you will see that the result is 1020. And of course, this is because what happens by default is that the parameters that we pass are considered to be strings. So they're just concatenated. So the string 10 plus the string 20 is of course 1020. That's a string concatenation. If I actually want to do a calculation, I have to typecast these parameters. So what I can do, of course, is I can say number 1 equals int number 1, but I can also just specify the data type of the parameter of the it's not a URL parameter, of the value that is passed here as part of the dynamic URL. I can specify it here in the route already. So I can say it's an int colon number 1 and it's an int colon number 2. So what happens here now is that this is considered to be an integer already. So I can say add 1020 and you can see 10 plus 20 is 30. What happens now is, though, when I pass something else, so when I say 10 hello, I get not found, because this is now obviously a string. It cannot be typecasted into an integer, and this route is only for integers. So if I pass something that's not an integer, it doesn't even have the route. It doesn't find the mapping. So those are, or this is how you do dynamic URLs. Those are URL processors. What we can also do is we can pass actual URL parameters. And maybe you've seen this, or probably you've seen this on a couple of websites. You go to something like login. Now, hopefully it's not done like this. This is very insecure. But you usually have something like login and then question mark username equals and then something. And then you have an and then you have password equals. And again, hopefully it's not in clear text in the URL. But these are URL parameters if you see them somewhere. So how can we handle those in Flask? What we can do is we can do the following app route, and then maybe let's call this handle. The suggestions you see here are, by the way, from my prepared code. It just thinks that I'm going to write all of the stuff again, and I actually am. So handle query or handle URL params, let's call it that way. Handle URL parameters. And the function is going to be handle params or something like this. Now we don't need to pass anything here now as a parameter. The parameters here are taken from the URL. So if I have these URL processors here, they're going to be part of the function signature. If I handle the actual URL parameters, it's happening by using a so-called or using the request instance. So what I have to do is I have to say from Flask import Flask and also request, and then it's going to be part of the request object. So I can do here, or actually I can return the string version of request.arguments. So I can just return this as a string version, and then I can go to handle handle URL params, and you can see it's an empty dictionary. So it's an empty immutable dictionary, but if I add now some parameters, so question mark name is equal to Mike, then you can see I have name and Mike in here. And if I say and greeting is equal to hello, you can see I have name Mike, greeting hello. So what I can do here is I can say that I want to handle the following thing. The greeting is going to be equal to request.args.get, and I can say here greeting, and the name is going to be the same thing with name. By the way, this is a dictionary, so you can also, instead of saying get, you can just do this. This also works. And then we can return, for example, an f string that says greeting and then name. So when I go back, I can just go to /handle URL parameters and then name Mike, greeting hello, hello Mike. So this is how you handle the URL parameters. Now, of course, if one is missing, this is going to give me a bad request key error. So it makes sense to check if we have all the parameters available. We can do something like if greeting in request arguments dot keys and name in request arguments dot keys. Then we do all this. Otherwise, we return some parameters are missing. So now if I do this, I get some parameters are missing. And if I go to this, I get hello Mike. All right. So this is how you handle the URL parameters. Now, if you have a post request, you actually get a form. We're going to talk about this, I think, in the next video. So we're not going to handle the post parameters yet. So we're not going to handle forms that actually include information that we pass with a post request. However, what we are going to do is we're going to learn how to handle different types of requests, because all these routes, all these endpoints that we define here are by default only handling GET requests. So we can see that this is the case by opening up a terminal. I'm not sure if this works out of the box on Windows. It does work on Mac and Linux. You can use the tool curl, and if you don't have curl, just install curl using your package manager. And curl basically just sends a request. So I can say http:// then localhost / hello, for example. And of course, I need to specify the port, which is 5555. And you can see I get hello world here as an answer. So I can just send a simple GET request to an endpoint, and I get whatever this endpoint returns to me. Now, what I can do is I can also specify the method. So I can say curl -x, so capital X, and then post to specify that now I'm sending a post request to the same endpoint. And what you can see here is I get as a response 405 method not allowed. So the post method is not supported by this endpoint. Now, if we want to change this, if we want to allow for post requests, we need to define this in the route definition. So for example, if I want to allow for post requests on the endpoint hello, what I have to do is I have to say methods equals, and then I have to pass a list of all the methods that I want to support on this endpoint. By default, this list looks like this. It's just get. However, I can also say it's just post. If I specify it like that, GET requests are no longer allowed. So I can save this, I can open up my terminal, and I can say curl http:// 127.0.0.1.5555 and then /hello. You will see it now tells me method not allowed, even though I didn't specify post, or exactly because I didn't specify post. Whereas if I say -x post, you will see I get hello world. So if I want to support both, I just have to say get and post. And then I can run the same thing. It works, and I can also run just, now the displaying is a little bit messed up. There you go. I can also do it with get, and I also get the same response. Now, the difference between get, post, put, delete is not really a technical one primarily. It's primarily a convention. You use get when you want to get a resource, when you want to get information. You use post when you want to submit information, so when you want to create something. You use put when you want to update information, so when there is, for example, if you have a to-do list application, you already have an existing to-do, you want to change something about it, you use put, and if you want to delete it, you use delete. So those are the four main methods. There are also others, but we're going to focus on those four. And you can basically just specify that you want to allow for put, you want to allow for delete, and so on. Maybe you only want to allow for delete, but this is how you use them. Get to get information, post to create information or to submit information, put to change information, delete to delete information. Now, let's say you support multiple of these methods on the same endpoint. How can you differentiate between the two or between the three or four? Let's say I have get and post here. What I can do is I can say if request.method is equal to get then I want to have a certain kind of behavior. So then I want to return, for example, here, you made a GET request. Then I can say elif request method is equal to post. And then I can just print you made a post request. Now you can also, if you want to, add an else branch, but this is not going to be relevant because the proper message here is you will never see this message. Because of course we cannot send a put request or a delete request or anything else to this endpoint, you will always only get a get or a post request. So I can go again into the terminal. Maybe let's go ahead and also add a \n in the end, just so we have a line break so that we don't have to constantly mess up the formatting in the command line. So I can send this request, you made a GET request. I can send a POST request, you made a POST request. And what you usually do later on, we're going to learn about templating and using HTML files and so on. What you usually do is you have one endpoint that does something, and when you send a GET request to that endpoint, you get the HTML template. So you get basically the form to fill out with maybe create a new to-do. You get when you send a GET request to this create to-do page, you get the form that allows you to create or to specify the new to-do. And then when you click the submit button, you send a POST request to the same endpoint to actually create the to-do. So in the GET branch, you would serve the HTML file, and here you would actually process the information from the form. All right, so this is how you handle the different methods. Now, last but not least, I want to show you how you can return a custom response. So how you can specify the status code that you want to return. And for this, we're going to actually also use the hello here. So let's go back and just return hello world. And let's only allow for get again. What we can do here, this is the simple way to do it. We can just specify the status code by passing or by returning it as a second value here. So I can just say comma 200, and this will return a 200 status code. Now I think 200 is the default. We can see if that is the case by just going again into the terminal, and let's just add again here for formatting reasons a \n. We can go ahead and say curl, but I can also specify here dash, what was it? I wrote it down here. I think it's dash capital I to get the response header. So you get HTTP 200 OK, and then you get also the content type, the content length. You can see it's text HTML, it's content length of 12 and so on. Now I can change this by just saying comma 201, which is created. So you usually use that after a POST request. I can just curl again, and you can see here now I get 201 created. I can also change this to 202, and then you get accepted. I can also change this, even though it doesn't fit here, I can also change this to 404, which is not found, and you can see I get not found. I can also change this to 500, which is, I think, internal server error. There you go. I can also change this to 501, which is something else, not implemented. And I can also change this to something like 936, which I don't even know what it is. Unknown. There you go. Or I can change this to something like this. I'm not sure if this is going to be rejected. Yeah, unsupported response code and HTTP response. So I have a video on this channel where I explain the different status codes, when to use which one, and what they basically mean. I'm not going to go through all this here. Just know 200s are basically to tell you that everything worked fine. 300s are for redirection. 400 is telling you you did something wrong, and 500 is telling you the server messed up something. That's like the most important thing to know. Now we can also go ahead and create a full custom response. So we can go and say from Flask import Flask request and make response, and then we can craft a full response. We can say response is equal to make response. And then we can do things like response.status code is equal to 202, for example. And then we can also say response, and I can actually, or response.headers, and I can actually manipulate things like content type is going to be equal to, and I can change this to application/octet stream, for example, or JSON or text plain or something like this. So I can go now, and you can see we get, actually we don't get this. because we were still returning hello world. We need to, of course, return the response. There you go. You can see now 202 accepted, content type application octet string. And of course, now we don't have any text, so we would have to add here hello world \n to have the content. There you go. And we still have content length 12. And if I just do it like this, I still get hello world. We can also change this here to text/plain, which is more fitting, I guess. There you go. Text plain, 202 accepted, and this is the content. So this is how you can craft custom responses. Alright, so we're going to cover a couple of different concepts in this video today. As I already mentioned, we're going to learn how to render HTML files. We're going to learn how to work with templates. In addition to that, we're also going to learn how to redirect. We're going to learn how to dynamically get the URLs for specific endpoints. And we're also going to learn how to work with the Jinja 2 templating engine, how to use filters, how to create custom filters. So it's going to be a quite comprehensive episode today. Now what we have here is a very basic Hello World project. We just have a simple index endpoint, and that's it. And up until this point, every time we had an endpoint, we returned some string, some JSON object, something like this, but not an actual HTML file. And this is the first thing that we're going to change now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a directory full of templates, full of HTML files, and then we're going to render them instead of just returning a text. And the first step to do that is in the definition of our application, we're going to add a keyword argument called template folder. And we're going to call the folder, in this case, templates. This is what it's usually called. Now, this folder, this directory now needs to be created here in our application. So I can right click, new directory, and I can call this here templates. Now, to keep it very simple, what we can do now is we can just create an HTML file in here. Let's call it index.html. And in my case here, I already have some basic structure, just doc type HTML, HTML head, character set defined, a title, and then an empty body. And we can say the title is Flask app. And then I can just, have a heading here, hello world, or something like this. This is now an HTML file in my templates directory, a very simple one. Now, in order to return the HTML file and not just some text, I need to import a function or a method called render template. And now what I do is I render the template instead of returning hello world. So I say return render template and then just the name of the file. We don't need to specify the path because we already know that the template folder is templates. So all I have to do is I have to say index.html. And in this case, when I run the application, when I go to the browser, you're going to see hello world. The HTML file has been rendered. Now, the good thing is now we can do a lot of things here that we can usually not do with HTML files. We can dynamically change what is happening in this HTML file. We can change the content of this HTML file. And we can do that, for example, in a very simple way by just passing certain keyword arguments. So for example, I might have my value here, and my value can be hello world, or let's change this to something else like, let's just call this neural 9. And then I might have some calculation, my result is equal to 10 plus 20. I do some stuff here in this method. I call some functions, I do some processing, and then I want to put these two values, these two resulting values, I want to feed them into the HTML file, and I want to dynamically render them in the HTML file. What I can do for this is I can just pass keyword arguments, whichever keyword arguments I want. I can say my value equals my value. I can say my result equals my result. And of course, they don't have to be the same name. I can also say XYZ equals my value. This is not a problem. The important thing is that the name that I choose for the keyword argument, so the left one, is the one that I have to access in the HTML file. The right side doesn't really matter. This is just a value. So now I have these two values, and I can easily just go into my HTML file, and all I have to do to display them is I can use some tags, so for example a paragraph, and in order to access these variables, these values, I just have to use double curly brackets, and I can now specify the variable name. So my value, for example, and I can copy this and change this to my result. By the way, I think that if you're working in PyCharm, you need to set up the templating language. I think you need to go to settings, template. Is there something like template language? Yeah, you have to go with template language and change this to Jinja 2 because this is the templating engine of Flask. But I think this only works in the professional edition. I'm not sure about that. But it's only about syntax highlighting. You can also do it without that. So you have these two things here now, and what I have to do, or what I can do now, is I can just go reload the page, and you can see I get the values in the page, even though I didn't explicitly say neural 930, I get whatever I passed from the function here. So that is how you use values that you pass. Now, you can also do some more advanced stuff. So for example, what I can do is I can say my list equals, and then I can have some elements in here, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And I can say that I want to pass the list. So let's just pass the list only. My list equals my list. Let's delete these two things. And what I can do now is, of course, I can go here and I can just say my list. This is easy. In this case, what would happen is I would just get the list. But I can also use certain other structures of the templating language. So I can go ahead and say I want to have an unordered list. So UL, and then I want to have certain list items. And I want to list all the individual elements of the list. How do I do that? I can do that with a Jinja 2 for loop. So I can use a single curly bracket, not double, single and then %. And then I also close this with % curly bracket. And here I can say now for, and I can call this whatever I want, item in my list. Now I need to close this with curly bracket % and for % curly bracket. And in between now, for each element in the list, I will do something. So I can also just say hello. Then I'm going to do this 5 times. This also works, as you can see. But it makes more sense to have a list item and to have the content of this list item be double curly brackets item. So what we do here is %, so single curly bracket % for a for loop, also for if statements and so on. And we use double double curly brackets for individual variables or values. Then you can see here, I get a list of the values. So this is what we can do here. What else can we do? Now we can do a lot of things. We can do conditions. So for example, I can say curly bracket % if item is equal to 30. What I want to do then is, again, also here, and if, then I can say if that is the case, I want to have a specific list item where the style is color red item, and I also need an else branch, and I can just copy this here. There you go. And in this case now, this one is red because I have this condition in here. Now, of course, I can also take this and make it more efficient by just not doing it like this, by just saying here, within the list item, I can just go and say % if item equals 30, then add the style and if, and otherwise don't. This has the same effect. It's just another way of writing it. So basically we have the if here, and then this is what happens if the condition is met. So this produces the same result, as you can see. All right, so that's like the simple stuff. This is the basic idea of templating, or at least of using values in the templates. Now, what we can also do, and this is now very interesting, is we can inherit templates. So let's say I want to have the same navigation, I want to have the same header, I want to have, or the same head section, I want to have the same imports, I want to have the same content on every single page I have on my page, or on my application, and I don't want to rewrite it all the time. So actually the only thing that's different about this index HTML compared to all the other files in my application is this content here. I don't need the rest. This is just what's unique about this. Everything else should be the same everywhere else. Maybe the title not. What we can do for this is we can create a so-called base template. So I can go ahead, I can create an HTML file, base.html, And in this base HTML file, I can now define the structure. So I can say we have this doc type HTML again, HTML language English. We define a character set, I have a body and so on. And the title now we can make dynamic. So we can say if you inherit from this template, you will be able to fill in certain blocks. So you will have certain sections that you can change. And as such a section can be defined as curly bracket %block, and then we can choose a name for this section. So title, for example. And then I also need end block. The idea now is that when we inherit from this template, we're going to see how to do that here in a second. When we inherit from this template, we can fill in this section. So depending on which page you're in, you're going to get a different title. However, I can also put a default value in between. So I can say default value, for example. This is going to be the default title if I don't actively fill in the title in the sub page that is inheriting from this template. And then I can do another block here in body. I can say, again, curly bracket %block content. And I can close this here, end block. And then I have some content here. So this is now the basic structure. And of course, if I want to, I can have a navigation here on each page. And this is now always the same. It's not part of the block. It will always be there. Or maybe just to show you that this is the case, I can add a paragraph here. This will always be here because it's not part of the block content here, or of the block content here. And now what we can do is we can go into our index file and we can extend from this template. So I can go here, I can delete all of this here. And at the top of my index HTML file, I can say now, curly bracket %extends and then base.html like this. So now it extends from base HTML. It has the same structure and I can fill in the blocks now. I can do the same thing, block and title, end block, and in title I'm gonna say here just index page. And then I can say block content, then I have my content here, and I can close this block. There you go. So now what I can do is I can refresh the page. You can see this will always be there and I still have the same content. And I can do this now with a different page as well. I can copy this, I can call this other HTML. I can change the title to other page, and I can, maybe just have a heading here, other, something like this. Then I also need an endpoint for this, so let's copy this. Let's call this other. Let's put the round to other, and then just render other HTML. There you go. And now when I rerun this, you can see here, first of all, we have, again, here index page, and then I can go /other, and this is still here, and we get other page as a title here. So this is very useful because you don't have to constantly make all the changes everywhere. Imagine you don't do that and you want to include a new CSS file or a new JavaScript file, or you want to import Bootstrap or something. You cannot just do it here once. You have to do it at every single HTML file you have, and chances are you have hundreds of them, depending on the size of your application. So it makes a lot of sense to have this base HTML file for the basic structure, and then to just extend it here with the other HTML files. All right. So now let us move on to a concept called filters. Now I have a video on this channel separately, a separate video about filters in Jinja. And I'm just going to briefly go through them. So I'm going to create here a new, or actually let's use the other page for that. Let's call it filters here. What we're going to do now is we're going to explore the effect of filters. So very basic here. Let's say I have some text that I pass to this endpoint. I have a text, and let's call this text just hello world. Some text equals some text. Now, as we already saw, I can just display this in a paragraph here in a very simple way by using double curly brackets, some text, just to see that this still works. There you go, hello world. Now what I can do is I can say I want to have certain operations applied to that. A very simple one is I want to have everything in uppercase. Now, what you do in Python is you call the .upper function, or you call other methods of the string. This is not really possible here in Jinja. What you do in Jinja is you use templates, and to use templates, filters. And to use filters, you need to pipe the text through a filter. So we use the pipe symbol, and for example, one filter is upper. This is a built-in filter. You need to know that these exist. There's a list of them in the documentation, but this is a built-in filter. And now if I go to the page, you can see we get hello world in uppercase. I can do the same thing in, let's maybe just keep all of them to compare them. I can do the same thing with lower. So now if I go here, you can see it's all lowercase. And there are also other filters. So for example, I can do title. I can do stuff like replace, where I can also add parameters. So I can say replace all the else by uppercase else, for example. This works. So here you can see title case is just default. And then we have here the replace filter active. And then we can also do... or actually, you know, there's a huge list of different filters that you can use. But what I'm interested in showing you here is that you can also define your own custom filters. So you can say, let's say you want to have a filter that reverses the string, for example. For some reason, you want to do that. This is not a filter, as far as I know, that is available by default. So you have to implement it yourself. And you can easily do that by going into your app UI and importing from Flask here, or actually I don't even think we need to import anything, sorry. We can go down here and we can create now not a route, so not app.route, but app.template filter. And we can call this filter, for example, reverse string. Then I can call the method reverse string, and it takes something as a parameter. And this parameter is just our text, so our string s. And what I can do now is I can just return s, and then I can reverse it like this, : -1. This is just how you reverse a string in Python. And now what I can do is I have this reverse string here. I can go to my other HTML and I can say reverse string. And now I can go here and you can see it reverses the string. It's my custom behavior. I get some input and I return some output. This is my filter. I can do other filters as well. I can do a filter called, what did I have here? Repeat is a very simple one. Repeat also takes additional parameters. So I can say repeat, and repeat takes a string, and I can also say it takes times. And times by default is 2, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be 10, and then I return just s times times. So I can go here, I can copy this, I can say repeat, and I can say repeat 5. And then you can see hello world, and then I get it 5 times as well. Maybe another thing that we can do is we can alternate the cases. Just now, one more example here. We can go and say app template filter, alternate case. Basically everything that's uppercase will be made lowercase and vice versa. So alternate case of s, and now we can return here empty string join. I'm going to use a list comprehension character upper if I, or actually, no, this would be swap case. Alternate case means you have uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase. So what we're going to do actually here is we're going to say if the index is modulo 2 is 0. So if it's an odd, if it's an even number, we're going to do c.upper else c.lower for I, C in enumerate s. And then what we get is, of course, we need to apply it as well. Let's go to other alternate case. There you go. We get this uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, and so on. So this is how you use filters. Now, one last thing, or actually two things that I want to show you here now is one, the redirect, and two, how you get dynamic URLs. So how you can get how you can get the URL of an endpoint dynamically without having to specify it statically, because of course it can change. So first of all, let's do the redirect. Or actually, first of all, let's do the dynamic URL, because the redirect can then use the dynamic URL for the redirection. Now let's say on my index page I want to have a link to other. So I want to have a link to the endpoint other. Now the endpoint other might have actually this URL here, but I might change this over time. So I might say this is something else now. I don't want to manually define that this is the endpoint, or that this is the route to this endpoint. So what I can do here in the index pages, I can have a link, I can have an anchor tag with the following destination, and now I can use double curly brackets again, and I can say URL _for, and then I just pass the function name, other. And then I can say here, other. Now you can see I didn't specify the route at all, but if I now go to this, and I reload the page, you can see I have a link to other, and you can see in the bottom left that it actually gets me to this page. So you can see here that the link is going to this URL here, to this endpoint dynamically. If I change it, it's going to change as well. So if I go here and I change this again back to other, it will also change in index.html without me having to do anything. There you go. Still works. Now this can also be used for redirects, and this can also be used in the Python code, not just in HTML, not just in the templating engine. So for example, what I can do is I can say, let's add a new endpoint here, app route, redirect endpoint, and then I can say redirect endpoint here. What I can do now is I can return, instead of returning a template or a text or something, I can just return a redirect. And for this, I need to import the redirect function. And I can just say return redirect. And the location now, I can of course say just /other, but I can also do, and for this I need to also import URL_for. I can just call the URL_for function here. URL_for and then other, for example. Redirects me to other. So if I now run the application again, and I go to /redirect endpoint, you can see I end up at the other page. So yeah, this is how you can do that. This is how you work with templates. This is how you render HTML files, how you can use filters in Jinja, how you can extend templates, and how you work in general with actual HTML content, not just text. Alright, so we're going to cover a lot of different things in this video today. Primarily, we're going to focus on handling post requests in the backend in a more advanced way than we already did in episode 2. We're going to learn about forms. We're going to learn how to handle forms data. We're going to learn how to send post requests using JavaScript with JSON data. We're going to learn how to handle that JSON data. We're going to learn how to upload files, how to process uploaded files, how to respond with a file download for the user, and stuff like that. And what we have here now for the beginning is a very basic Flask application, which just renders an index.html file. This index.html file just has a heading hello world, and it extends a base HTML template. Nothing too fancy here. Very simple. We already know how all of this works. I can run this so that you can see what this looks like again. Just a basic hello world page. And what we want to do now is we want to handle a post request, but we don't want to do it the way we did it in episode 2 with curl, with a command line tool. We actually want to have an HTML form where I can input some data, where I can press a button, and then the post request is sent and something is done based on that post request. So what we're going to do here is a very simple example, is a dummy login page. So we're just going to have username, password, and then we're going to send a post request with username, password, and if they match some static string, then we're going to say success, otherwise we're going to say fail. So this is of course not an authentication system. It's just a dummy page that, you know, processes username and password and compares them to strings, but it's a good start to understand what is happening here. or how this works. So we're going to use index for that. And what we need to do first is we need to specify that multiple methods are allowed here. By default, remember, get is already allowed, but we still need to specify it here if we want to change this. And we now also want to allow for post requests here. So the idea is with a get request, we want to get the HTML page to display the form. And then when we submit that form, we want to send a post request, and then we want to process the data that was sent. So what we're going to do here is, first of all, import request. And we're going to distinguish between two cases. If request.method is equal to get, then what we want to do is we want to just render the index.html file. Otherwise, if request method is equal to post, we want to do something else that we don't have yet. So I'm just going to return an empty string for now. We're going to implement that once we have the form. So what we want to do now is we want to get into index.html and we want to create a simple form. So I'm just going to say here form. And now we need to specify a couple of things. We want to say method is equal to post. This is a post request that we're sending, and the action is the target URL that we're sending this to. Here, for this, we're going to use, again, double curly brackets, URL for, and the endpoint that we're sending the post request to, in our case, index. Now, of course, what you can also do if you want to, you can also create a separate endpoint login that only accepts post requests, and then index only accepts get requests. And then, of course, you can also send the action to another page. You don't have to send it to the same page. You can also send it to a different endpoint. But we're going to do it like this now. And in this form, we're going to have two basic fields, input type text. Now, the important thing here is the name. We don't need an ID. This is more for CSS stuff, for styling. We don't need a class. We need a name. The name is important because the name is what we're going to get as a key for the key value pair in the backend. So we're going to say that the name is username here. And then we're going to define a placeholder, username. And then we're going to copy this, type password, name is going to be password, and placeholder is going to also be password. Like this. And then finally, we want to have an input type submit with the value login. And probably we should add some line breaks here. So when I run this here, you can see we have this basic form. I can enter some stuff. And I think if I just do something, I'm going to get an empty response here. Because remember, if we send a post request, which we now did, we just get an empty string as a result here. So what we would actually want to do is we would want to compare the username and password to our quote-unquote actual username and password. So what we do here is we say username equals, and now we have to get the username from the post request that was being sent. So we're going to say request.form. Now this is important. If you get the request from a form, the post request comes from a form, we get request.form and then get key, or you use it as a dictionary. However, if you send a request with JavaScript and you send a JSON object, you have to use request JSON. We're going to look at this here in a second. Request form, and now I can access the key username like this, or I can also say form.get username. Whatever you like, it's the same thing. It's just a different way of writing it. And then password, request, form, get, password. So now we get these things from the post request. And of course, if you have some optional stuff, it makes sense to first of all check if it's part of the form. So you can say if, and then before getting it, because in this case you would get an exception if you have something that's not part of the form that was submitted and you try to access it, you're going to get an exception. It's going to crash your application. What you should do is something like if username in request form keys, only then get username. But in this case, there's no way to not get the username because we're going to use the application properly. So for now, we're going to ignore this. But this is how you get the two things now from the form. And now we can say if username is equal to, let's say, neural9, and password is equal to, let's say, password, then return, now we're just going to return a text success. Otherwise, we're going to return failure, like this. So I can go here again. I can type some nonsense. There you go, failure. And now I can go and I can say neural9, password, success. So this is how you handle very basic form data. Now, what we can also do is we can upload files. This now gets a little bit more advanced because you need to consider a couple of things. When you upload files, you have to provide specific types of inputs. You also have to change stuff about the form itself, and you have to also access the files in a different way. So this right here is a very simple way. You just have some input stuff, you have some text, password, number, whatever, and you just name them and you just access them. This is how you handle basic form data. You can now add a bunch of other fields here with type number and stuff like this. Doesn't really matter. It's the same way of handling it. You just get the form dictionary and then you get the individual keys. And again, if something is optional, you just say if whatever key you have, some key in request form keys, then get it from there to keep it safe. Now we're going to handle files, and for this I want to actually create a new endpoint. I want to create an endpoint file upload. So we're going to say app route / file upload, and here now we want to handle what happens when a file is being uploaded. For now, I'm just going to return an empty string because first of all, again, I want to handle this in the HTML file. So we're going to create another form here. Let's maybe add a heading in between to know the different sections. We're going to add a new form here, and we're going to start the same way. Method is equal to post. Action is going to be equal to now, of course, a different URL. So URL for the method or for the function file upload. And the important thing now is that we need to specify an encoding type. We need to say that this is now, we need to add this parameter here, enc type is equal to multi-part form data, because we're going to pass files now, so it's a different type of encoding that we have to use here. Multi-part form data. This is important. Then what we can do is we can say input, and the type of the input is file. However, this is not all of it because file is very generic. What kind of file are you expecting? Are you expecting any type? Are you expecting any kind of file? Or are you expecting maybe just plain text or just Excel files or just CSV files or something like this? Depending on that, you're going to have to specify a different keyword here or a different parameter here in a second. So we're going to say the name is just file, nothing too fancy. And what we want to do now is we want to say except equals, and except equals, now you can specify certain content types. Now, what these content types are exactly, you have to Google most of the time. Here in PyCharm, I have all the suggestions, which is very convenient. But if you have a certain file type that you want to allow for here, you need to Google what the content type string is actually. What I want to allow here now is I want to allow Excel files, so basic Excel files, XLS and XLSX, and also plain text. So how do I do that? I have to know what the proper content type is for Excel, and I think it is application VND, and then we need open XML formats. So you have to scroll for a while here. Oh, actually, I don't think that we have it here. So I have to type it out. Application /VND dot open XML formats dash office documents dot spreadsheet. Usually you want to copy that. You don't want to type this out. Actually, I'm going to copy this now because that's there's no value in doing this here. So let me just mark this and then copy this to my clipboard. Then I'm gonna just paste this here. So the idea is you get the content types. In this case, I have 3 content types. This is 1. Then I use a comma to separate them. Then I use another one, and then I use a comma again, another one. So here I have Excel again, and then text plain, so TXT files. So that's basically it. Then I can also set this to required equals required, even though I think required in and of itself should be enough. Let's do it like that. And then I can use again input type submit or Yeah, submit, and then the value of that is upload file. So let's go ahead. I can browse the file. I can use data XLSX. I can upload the file, and in this case, it tells me method not allowed because in my file upload here, I didn't specify that the method that I want to allow here is equal to post. Let's go again, upload the file, and I get nothing in return because, of course, we had returned an empty string. So now it's about handling that file. Let's say what we want to do here in this case is we just want to, in the case of a text file, we want to return the content of the file. So we just want to display the content of the text file. In the case of an Excel file, we want to render the table. We want to load it into a data frame, and we want to render the table to the HTML file. So we want to show an HTML table of the data frame. For this, of course, we need pandas. So if you don't have pandas installed, this is now just an example, by the way. If you don't care about pandas, you don't want to process Excel files, just skip this. You don't need to work with that. That's not part of the course. But we're going to do this here now as an example. In this case, you would have to install pandas like this. Pip or pip3 install pandas. And of course, we need to also then import pandas as PD. And now what we would do here is we would first of all get the file. So we would say that the file is equal to request.files. This is now a separate field. It's not form, it's not JSON, it's files, specifically for files. And here we want to get file. This is again the name here, file. What we now want to do is we want to look at the content type of the file and decide what we do with that file. So we're going to say if file.content type is equal to text/plain. If that is the case, all I want to do is I want to return file read the content of the file, decode it so that it's a string because it's binary data, I think, by default, since we have the encoding type. And that happens when we have a text file. Otherwise, if the file content type, file content type is equal to the Excel stuff, and I think for this I'm gonna just do it like this, or file.content type is equal to that. So just the two different content type strings. If it's one of those, then what we want to do is want to say data frame is equal to pandas read Excel and then the file like this. And then what we want to return is just df2html, which is a method in pandas that allows us to turn the data frame into HTML so that we can easily just display it. All right, so that is it. And we can actually see now, hopefully, that this works. So I have data XLSX, I can upload it. And you can see I get the content of the Excel file. This is the content of the Excel file as HTML here rendered. Now I can also go here now and I can create a text file. Let's call this hello.txt, and I can say hello world. This is a text file with some text. And then I can go here, I can browse, I can get hello.txt, upload file, and there you go. Now the line breaks are not displayed properly, but that's okay. And you can see we can distinguish between content type and get different responses. So this is how you handle file uploads. You get a file from request files. This is just whatever file you submit here is input type file. You accept certain file formats, you can check for them, and you can process them in different ways, depending on what the content type is. So that's actually quite straightforward and simple. Let us now actually go and implement a use case that might be interesting. Let's go ahead and convert an Excel file to a CSV file. So we take an Excel file and we take the content that we displayed as a table here in HTML, and we want to return. So this is now also about a file download. As a result of the request, we don't just want to display something, we actually want to return a CSV file to the user that the user can download. So how can we do that? For this, what we're going to do is we're going to create an endpoint app route. I'm going to call this convert CSV. By the way, the reason you already always see the names that we're going to use is because I have all the code prepared, so it already knows what I want to call the functions or the routes at least. So convert CSV is going to be the endpoint. And here now, all we want to do is we want to take the file and we want to return the converted version. So the CSV file. And for this now, again, we're going to just copy this part. We're going to paste it down below. We're going to change this to convert to CSV. And now we're not going to allow for text plain. We're only going to allow for Excel. So we have, and also we're going to not send this to file upload. We're going to send this to convert CSV. And it's important, of course, to specify here again, methods is equal to post. We accept post requests on this endpoint. And the idea is the same now. We get the file. We say file equals request files file. And in this case, it's always going to be an Excel file. We don't even need to check for this. It's always going to be an Excel file because those are the two things that we accept. By the way, let me just, I hope this can be run right now. You can see which types are supported down here. You can see now, since I, in the first form, allowed for Excel, and text file, these are the supported types. And only these are actually displayed here. Whereas here now, I only have Excel and Excel. All right. So we know that this is going to be the file type. What I can do now is I can load this into a data frame again, pd.readExcel file, and then I can craft a response that I can give to the user, and in this response, I'm actually returning a file. How do I do that? I import from Flask response with a capital R, and then I do the following thing. Response is equal to response. And here I specify a couple of things. First of all, what am I responding with? And what I'm responding with is a CSV file. So df2 CSV. I'm taking the data frame and turning it into a CSV file. And since I'm not specifying a path here, I'm getting the object itself as a result. So df2 CSV. Then I specify the MIME type, which is the content type. And the string for CSV is just text/CSV. And then what I do is I say headers equals, and here I pass now a dictionary with a key content disposition. And we pass the value attachment and file name equals, and now you can choose the file name of the CSV file. Now this is important, this is optional, but this is important because the file itself doesn't have, or actually I'm not sure if this is in this case even optional, maybe it's even mandatory, but the thing that you're returning, you need to also specify a file name for it. And what you can do with this header field is you can specify what the download name is going to be, because there's also another use case which we're going to look at in a second, where you actually have the file stored on your system and the file might have a completely random file name, but you want to return it as result CSV, for example. So this is why you need this header. And now what we do is we just return the response itself. So again, we get the file, we load it into pandas, we turn it into a CSV file, we specify the type, we specify the header with a file name, and that is it. So now this should already work. I load the Excel file, upload file, and now you can see that for this I'm gonna now navigate to my directory here, results CSV. I don't want to do that, come on. Current save result CSV, and now I have a CSV file with the information from the Excel file. So this is one way to serve a file. This is one way to return a file for download. We can find a second way now, or we can do a second way now, which is you get the file, you download the file from the user. So the user uploads the file, and you process the file, and what you do is the result, you don't return it immediately, you save it in a downloads directory, and then what you do is you return to the user a download page with a separate button. So the user uploads an Excel file, clicks on convert, and instead of just getting the file as a result, he's redirected to a download page, and at this download page, the file is then loaded from the system, from the server, and downloaded. This is, in my opinion, more professional most of the time. You don't want to just return the file immediately. You want to have a download page, and then you can download the file from there. but of course it depends on the use case. So we're going to call this convert CSV2. And the function is going to also be called convert CSV2. And of course, this takes methods equals post. And what we want to do now here is, let's copy this, convert to CSV2, convert CSV2. We're going to have to add a couple of things here because we need a download template in our application. We need to have here a download HTML file, which actually I'm going to just copy index. I'm going to call it download HTML. And for now, we're just going to have downloads as a heading here. And actually nothing else. I'm going to add the stuff later on. And in our convert to function, now we're going to do the same thing. File equals request dot files file. Then we're going to load this into a data frame. So pd read Excel file. And now what we're going to do is we're going to see, does the download directory that I want to store this in, the CSV file in, does it already exist? If not, we're going to create it. And then we're going to place the CSV file there so that it can be downloaded later on. For this, we're going to need the OS module or package. So import OS. And we're going to say if os.path.exists, or actually if not os path exists, downloads, we're going to do os make dears downloads. And then we're going to create a file name. We're going to say file name is equal to, and the important thing now is we want to have some file name that's completely random. It doesn't really matter, but we want to make sure that we don't use the same file name that's maybe already there. And for this, we're going to import another Python library, UUID, which is basically generating a random ID, which is almost certain to not be the same as one that you generated already. So it's very unlikely that you're going to generate something that you already have. So we're going to say file name is equal to UUID, UUID4, and then .csv. So just some generated file name. And now what we're going to do is we're going to save the file with this file name, and then we're going to return download HTML, and we're going to pass the file name as a parameter to the HTML file so that the HTML file, when you press download, knows which file to actually download. So we're going to say df to CSV, and then os path join downloads and file name. And then we return render template download HTML, and the file name is equal to file name. Now, the important thing about download is now it has to actually download from an endpoint. So it actually needs to call an endpoint that makes the download, that performs the download. So we're going to create this one, app.route download /download actually. And then we're going to just call this download. And here what we're going to do is we're going to return, and this is now a function that we need to import again from Flask. It's called send from directory. So we send from directory. And this is now the directory downloads, the file name, which we need to pass here, or we want to pass here as a URL parameter. So I'm going to just call this file name. I'm going to pass this here as file name. This is now, again, these URL processors. We pass the file name here, and then the download underscore name is what we want the file actually to be called. So again, we have some random file name, some numbers and letters mixed together, .csv, but the download name should be result.csv. All right, and then finally, what we need to do is we need to go to download. We need to create an anchor tag with the following URL, url4, download, and the file name is equal to file name. And then download file. So if I'm not mistaken, this should actually be it. I need to run the application. There you go. Now this is not the best styling, I know. Let's go ahead, upload data XLSX, upload file. Now I'm redirected to download. We can see here behind the scenes a downloads directory was created with some random file name. You can see here the UUID. It's the CSV file. And now what I can do is I can download the file and I get results CSV. I can save it, replace the existing file, and I now have the same file here. And if I do this again, I'm going to get a different file. So I can do this again, upload file. And now you can see I have a second file here and I'm going to download it and it's going to be result CSV again. And of course, you should probably on a regular basis clean the downloads directory. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of different files that you don't need anymore. Maybe once a day you should clean it. But yeah, this is how you can do that. Then finally, I also want to cover how to post JSON data with JavaScript. So this is now no longer Python and HTML. Now we're going to actually use JavaScript to send a post request with a button click. Now, why is this useful? It's useful because sometimes you're going to have some button or some chat or something that you want to use to send requests to the backend. So a very simple example of that is you have a chat bot, you have a chat window, and you have an AI model in the background answering the request. You have an endpoint that you need to communicate with, but you don't want to actually send form data. So to chat with a chatbot, you don't want to send, you don't want to fill out a form with your message, send the request, and then be redirected to another page to get the response. You want to do this dynamically in the same window. You want to just send a request using JavaScript, get the response, update the HTML, and so on. This is why you want to do that. So for this, let me just close all of this. Let's go to index again. We're going to do down below h1 JavaScript JSON request. And all we're going to do here now is we're going to have a button, and the button will have an ID. This is now important. The ID is important because now we're working with JavaScript. JavaScript works with ID. An ID is a unique identifier for a specific element in HTML. And we're going to call this post button. And we're going to say send post request. And what we need now is we need an endpoint that we're going to send a request to. This is going to be the endpoint that handles the JSON data. And for that, we're going to go to app.py. We're going to create an endpoint app route. Let's call this handle post, which of course needs to take method post. Handle post. And what we do in this one here is we get the JSON data. We expect this post request to be a JSON, to have the content type JSON. So we say here, what we're going to do is we're going to have a greeting and a name, and we're going to process a greeting and name by writing it into a file and then returning that the file was successfully written. So we're going to say greeting is equal to request.json. And then greeting, I can copy this, name equals request JSON name. And then I want to say with open file.txt in writing mode sf, fwrite, and then just greeting name. And then we want to return just a JSON object saying that it was successfully written. So key message and value successfully written. So I can just do it like this, message, and then successfully written. Now, the best practice way to do this is to JSONify this to make sure it's actually a JSON object. So you want to import JSONify from Flask, and you just want to call the function on this. So JSONify on this dictionary, and that's it. So this is our endpoint, and now we're going to send a post request to that endpoint using JavaScript. So script, we're going to create a script tag down here. Script type is text JavaScript, and the functionality is going to be the following. We're going to get the button as a constant here, so const post button is going to be equal to document.getElementById. Now this is core JavaScript. You probably want to use something like jQuery if you're actually doing some JavaScript stuff, but this is now core JavaScript. Get element by ID, post underscore button, then const JSON data is gonna be equal to, and now let's just go with name, or actually we don't need quotation marks here. Name is gonna be equal to Mike, and the greeting is gonna be equal to hello. And of course, in the case of a chatbot, you would not just statically define the JSON data, you would actually get it. You would get the content of a text box that contains the data. You would get the content from the chat window. You would update the content of the chat window, but we're keeping it simple now. We have some static JSON dictionary here, some static JSON data. And now we're going to add an event to the post button. We're going to say post button dot add event listener. And the event listener that we're targeting is click. So when you click on the button, the following is going to happen. We're going to have an anonymous function here. Just parentheses, then equals, and then the greater than sign, so an arrow basically, then curly brackets, and in here now we're going to call the fetch function, and the URL is, again, we can get it dynamically, URL 4, and the URL 4 is going to be handle post. So that is where the request is going. Then again, curly brackets, to say the method that we're using here is post. And we need to specify the headers because, of course, what we're sending is JSON data, but we need to also specify its JSON data. So we're going to say content type is application slash JSON. Then semicolon character set is equal to UTF-8, so the encoding. Basically, and the body, this is now the content. The body is equal to JSON.stringify JSON data. This is basically sending the request. What we want to do now also is we need to respond, or we need we can respond. So we can say here dot then. What happens then? Response is response.json. And then then we can say data console log. And we can log that this was successful. Success is success data here. So success colon data. And then finally we can say catch. If there is an error, we can also come on. I'm not used to JavaScript. I don't like JavaScript, so I have to constantly check my second screen. Console.error, and we can just log the error message. Yeah, that's basically it. And I think this needs to be closed, and this also needs to be. No, actually, where is this closed? This is actually closed here. I think I messed up something in my code. Yeah, of course, because we need it like this. All right, so to just go over this again, we define the element post button to be the element in the document that has the ID post button, which is our button here. We have some static JSON data. In an actual application, you would read this from the text boxes. Then you add an event listener to the button. When the button has the event click, then the following thing happens. We fetch to the URL of the handle post endpoint with a post request. We have the content type JSON. We get the JSON data, we stringify it, that's the body. Then we get the response, we get the data, we log the data if it was successful. If there's an error, we log the error message. That is what we do here. So let's go ahead and go to the site. Let's go ahead and open up the console. Let's send the post request. There you go. Success successfully written. Then I can see I have file.txt. Hello, Mike. So this is how you can handle JSON data from JavaScript post requests. All right, so we're going to learn how to work with static files in Flask in this video today, which means we're going to learn how to work with images, CSS files, JavaScripts, and so on. How can we load these things into our HTML files? How can I specify the path to an image? How can I link to a style sheet? How can I load a JavaScript from the respective directory? How is this done in Flask properly? and how do I work with static files in general. In addition to that, we're also going to use that knowledge to integrate Bootstrap into our Flask application, just so you see how you can integrate something simple like a CSS framework. And yeah, this is what we're going to do in this video today. So this is our starting point. We have a simple Flask application, just an index endpoint rendering the index.html file, which just extends the base HTML template. We just have a simple hello world heading here. And now let's say my goal is to display an image here. So let's say I want to have an image tag down here. This is basic HTML. I have an image. The image has a source, and the image also has an alternative text. So something like this here. And that is basically our image here. How do I do that now in Flask? So where do I put the images? How do I link to the images? Because for our templates, it's very simple. We have a template folder, and we just specify the name of the HTML file. So we have the templates, all the HTML files here in the templates directory. And then in order to load the HTML files, I just have to specify the file name. How do I do that now with static files? The way you do that with static files is very simple to the way you do that with templates. You define a static folder. So you have to add an additional parameter here, an additional keyword argument called static folder equals, and then you can choose the name of the static folder. Usually you call this static. And then in addition to that, we also want to specify a static URL path. So how do we get there? And what I like to do, or what is usually done, is you just pass slash. So a simple slash, and then you can access all the different directories from the static directory just after the slash. So in addition to templates now here, we add an additional directory called static. And in this directory, what I like to do and what is usually done is you have different directories for the different types of static files that you want to serve. So you can have something like img or images. You can call this whatever you want. I like to call it img. Then you have maybe another one for CSS. And then maybe you have another one for scripts, or you can call it JavaScript or JS, whatever you want to call it. So CSS, IMG, JS. Again, you can call this CSS, images, scripts, something like this. It doesn't really matter, but now you have the static directory, the static folder, which is also defined here in the application. And when I now put an image here, so for example, I have here the prepared logo.jpg, just a Neural 9 logo, I can just take it, drag it into IMG, and now this image is in the static folder, and all I have to do to display it in the index.html file is in the source I have to say /img/logo.jpg, and it's automatically going to recognize, since I have static as the folder and the URL path is slash, I can just go into /img because I'm already in static. When I go slash, I can go img, logo, JPEG, and that's it. So I can run this application, and you're going to see that we have the Neural 9 logo here. Very simple. And this now works, of course, with style sheets, with scripts, whatever you want to do, you can do that. So for example, I can go ahead and I can create a file called style.css. And here maybe I can create a class special. And this special class here, I want to say that the color of the text in that class has to be red, and the font size has to be, I don't know, 18 pt. And then I can go into my index.html file. I can create maybe a span or something, give it a class special, and I can just add hello here. Then I can go to my application. And of course, we're not going to see anything for, first of all, let's make this a paragraph. But of course, we also need to include the style sheet into our HTML template. So let me just show you again that we have hello down here. So the styling is not applied, even though I had the class set to special. Of course, we need to also include this CSS file. And how you usually do that is you go to the head section, which is of course in our base template, not in our index file. And here I do a simple link, rel equals style sheet, type equals text CSS, and the source or the path is equal to /css/style CSS, like this. And then I can load the page again, and you can see the styling is applied because it loads the static files from the static directory. What else I can do is I can create a JavaScript. So for example, I can go and I can say I want to have a simple JavaScript that displays some pop-up after 5 seconds. So I can go ahead and I can say hello.js, and I can define window on load is equal to a function that is called when the window is loaded. And this function, what it does is it sets a timeout, and there's another function in here. And what we basically do is we just alert, which is just pop up the warning, hello world. And we do that after 5,000 milliseconds. So after 5 seconds, basically, that is our JavaScript. Now, this alone won't do anything. If I open the page and wait for 5 seconds, nothing's going to happen because, of course, the script is not loaded in the index.html file. I have to load the script again from the static directory. For example, here at the bottom, I can just say script, and then source is equal to /js hello JS, like this. Not sure if I have to specify a type. I don't think so. Now we can wait for 5 seconds and we should get a pop-up after 5 seconds. There you go, hello world. And yeah, this is the basic idea of how you load images and CSS files and JavaScript files. Everything that's static can be just placed here, and you can just access it because you defined in the app py file, here in the definition of the app, you defined a static folder and a static URL path. So we can use this now, of course, to also integrate Bootstrap. So we can go to the Bootstrap website, which is this one here. And basically you can just download the compiled CSS and JavaScript. You can just download the zip file, which I have here. And then we can go and open files. I can just open this, and here we can see we have JS and we have CSS. So all I have to do is I have to go to static JS. I can take all these files here. I can extract them. I can go back. I can go to CSS. I can go up here, CSS, take all these files, drag them in here. And now we have Bootstrap basically installed in our Flask application. That was already it. The only thing that you need to do now to actually be able to use Bootstrap is you have to, of course, link the style sheet and load the JavaScript. So I can say link rel style sheet, type text CSS, and then /CSS/ and then bootstrap.css. And then also here I can go and I can say script source is equal to /js/bootstrap.js. There you go. And now in index, for example, I can go ahead, let's remove the image. I can go ahead and add a button or an anchor tag. So I can just say going nowhere. Let's just use a filler here. I want to have some button text here, and I can go ahead and I can say class equals, and now btn primary, for example, which is these two are Bootstrap classes that define the styling of the button. You can see this is now a Bootstrap button. And of course, if I change this to button danger, I will get a red button. That is Bootstrap, as you can see, loaded and working. Alright, so we're going to learn about session management and cookie management in Flask in this video today, and we're also going to learn about message flashing. Now let us get started with the first two, sessions and cookies. The basic ideas here are quite similar because in both cases we want to keep track of information, we want to store information that is relevant for multiple requests. So we want to keep information across multiple requests. Because HTTP in general is stateless, which means we have a request and a response, and we don't have a state that keeps track of information about the overall exchange. So if you want to do that, you have the two basic ideas or the two basic methods to have a session or to have cookies, to use cookies on the client side or to keep track of session information on the server side. That's the major difference, the location of the storing. And also for security reasons, if something is sensitive and you want to be able to trust it, you want to keep it in the session, you want to keep it on the server side. And if something doesn't really matter, it doesn't really matter if it's changed, it doesn't really matter if the user sees it, you can store it in a cookie on the client side, so in the browser. Because whatever you store in a cookie on the client side can of course be changed by the client, can be seen by the client. Whereas if you just provide the client with an ID, with a so-called session ID, and then you store the information for that session ID on the server, and you do all this with a secret key, you sign it with a secret key and so on, this is more secure. So these are the two things we're going to talk about here. Now, this is again our basic starting application. We have an index endpoint rendering the index.html file, quite simple, and we have the base HTML template here that is extended by index.html. Very simple. Now, the first thing we want to do here in order to be able to use sessions is we need to set a secret key for the signing, for the encryption, basically. So app.secret key has to be set to something. Now, in practice, you want to use a good secret key here. For learning purposes, for testing purposes, you can use whatever you want, just some key here. Again, if you have an actual application, you want to definitely set this to something, proper. But you have now this secret key, and with this secret key now, you can issue basically session IDs, and you can keep track of information of individual users, of individual clients on the server side. So, for example, if I want to do this in the index endpoint, or actually let's create individual endpoints for all of these things we're going to talk about here. Let's do /setData. And let's call the function here setData as well. And what we want to do here is in the session, and for this we need to import from Flask import session here. In the session dictionary, you could say, we want to set now some field to something. So for example, I can go and say name equals Mike. Now, these are just examples. You can, of course, do whatever you want here. In reality, in actual applications, as I mentioned, the session data is something that is usually sensitive or that should not be changed by the user, that should not be seen by the user maybe, something that is not, something that you're supposed to be able to trust on the server side. That's the basic idea. So session name equals Mike, and then session, maybe something else, let's call it other, equals hello world, whatever you want to call it. So this is now information stored in the session dictionary in this case, and this will be associated with a specific session ID. So what I can do here now is I can say return render template, and I can return index.html. Maybe what we're going to do here is just so we see the difference, because I'm going to return here a couple of times. I'm going to add a paragraph here, and in this paragraph we're going to just have some message, and the message will be passed here. So I can say message equals index, and here I can say message equals session data set or something like this. And then maybe also let's go ahead and have a couple of anchor tags here with URL4 so that we can have some buttons to play around with. URL4 set data, and then set session data. So let's run the application and let's open this up. There you go. So now I can click on set session data and it says session data set. And I can actually see that in my browser. If I right click, go to inspect, and then I go to storage, you can see that I have a cookie here. So I have a cookie here in Firefox, and the name of the cookie is session, and the value is something that I cannot really read. You can see I don't have any information here. I don't see the actual values for name and other. I just have a session cookie, and the server has the information for name and for other, and I can just get it. The server can provide me the information if the server wants to, but I don't have the information here on the client side. I just have this session cookie that I can identify myself with, basically. So now I can make another endpoint. I can create a route app route get data, and here now I could just go ahead and render the data as the message or into the message. So I can say that the name is equal to session name, that other is equal to session other, and then I can just return render template index.html, and the message will be a formatted string, an F string, where I have this information. So I can say something like name, and other, whatever. And then, of course, I also want to add an anchor tag for this so that we can easily do these things interactively. So here I have set session data, get session data, set, get. Now the interesting thing is I can go now into my memory, or actually storage, and I can delete the session cookie. So I can delete my identifier that the server needs to know who I am, that the server needs to understand that this is the same session. So I can just go ahead, delete this, and now if I go to get session data, I get the key error name because there is no session for this. I don't have a session cookie, I don't have a session ID, so there's no data that the server can provide me with. So actually what would make sense is to say something like if name in session.keys and other in session.keys. If that is the case, do this, else just return with the message no session found. So in this case now, get session data, no session found, set session data, get session data. There you go. So again, this is all happening on the server side. This is for security reasons. This is what you want to do if you have some sensitive information and you want information that the user cannot change. Now, we can do the same thing now, or actually before we go to cookies, let me show how you can clear a session. You can also create an endpoint app route, and then we can say clear session. And then clear session is also the function. What I can do here is I can say session.clear. And then this basically clears the session, the sessions entirely. So it clears all the session data. And I can then, again, just copy this and return the message session cleared. So now when I run this, I don't have a link to this, so let me just add this, maybe also with a line break to get a better overview. Clear session, clear session data. Then I can clear it. Now, when we look at the storage, I don't have anything here. I can set it. Then I can look again. I have the session cookie. I can get it. Still have the session cookie. I can clear the session data. And I don't have the session cookie anymore. And now I cannot get it because it tells me again, no session found. So that is how you work with sessions. Now, cookies are quite similar. The important thing again is cookies are stored on the client side. Now, actually, one more thing before we get on, you can also just pop individual fields. Now, I'm not going to run this now to not spend too much time on this, but if you don't want to clear the whole session, but you only want to pop individual fields, you can also do something like session pop and then name, for example. So you can pop the name key value pair from the session, but then you would still have other. So if you have some mechanism for only reading certain parts of it, you can also only clear certain parts of it. So let us move on to the cookies now. Let's say we have a route. We want to call this route set cookie. And the method is also, or the function is also set cookie. And what we do here now is we make a response. The response instructs the browser to set a cookie. Again, this is client side. So now we cannot just set the cookie. We need to instruct the browser to set the cookie on the client side. And then the client has control over the cookie. So I can say response is equal to, and for this we need to import a function called make response. I think we talked about this already. Make response, and the response we make is just render template index.html with the message cookie set. That is the response, and to this response now we can attach a cookie, or we can set a cookie. So response set cookie, and then we just pass the key and we pass the value. So we pass the cookie name and the cookie value. So in this case, the name is cookie name, or the key is cookie name, and the value is cookie value. And then I can just return the response. And then I can also just copy this, paste this, set cookie, and I need to run the application. there's a problem because I didn't use a slash. There you go. Now we can right click, inspect, look at the storage, look at the cookies. We don't have cookies. I can also set a session cookie. There you go. And now I can set cookie. And now you can see we have cookie name, cookie value. You can see that this is now clear text. I can see the content of the cookie. I can see cookie name, cookie value. It's not like with a session where the server has the information. I have it here in my browser. And now we can have an endpoint get cookie. So I can copy this down here. I can change this to get cookie. And now what we want to do is we want to say cookie value is equal to request. Now, do we have request imported? No. We need to get from request, we need to get the cookies. And in particular here, we want to get the cookie with the name cookie name. Of course, you can have multiple cookies. You can set cookie name, cookie value, then something else. But in this case, we're interested in this one cookie. So we get the value and then we can return a response. In this case, it's going to be render template index HTML. And the message is going to be formatted string cookie value is equal to cookie value. So let's load this. And of course, we need to have a link here as well. So just copy, change S to G. And now let's go ahead and see get cookie, cookie value. So you can see again, the cookie is still here. Now the thing is, since I have control over it, I can change it. It's my browser, I can do with it whatever I want. And now if I go to get cookie, you can see that the value has changed, which shows you why the session might be a better choice in certain cases. If it's my choice, whatever I want to do with a cookie, it's my choice. I can you know, manipulate it. Maybe it's not sensitive, maybe it doesn't really matter. But if the server needs to have control about something or over something, if the server needs to be able to trust the information, then of course use the session. And don't use cookies, because cookies, I can do with them whatever I want. I can set new ones, I can change them, I can do whatever I want with cookies, because they're on my system, they're in my browser. Whereas the session, of course I can also change this, but I cannot change it in a meaningful way. I cannot change the value of name and other just because I changed this cookie, session cookie here. All right, what else can we do? We can also invalidate cookies, so we can remove cookies. Let's copy this here. Remove cookie. And the way we do that is we basically make a response and we instruct the browser to expire the cookie, to say the cookie expires in immediately, basically. So we can actually copy this here. It's almost the same. We say cookie removed. And what we do here now is we set cookie name, but we don't set a value to it because the default value is just an empty string. We set expires equal to 0. And then we just return the response. Let's go. And I always forget to add the new endpoint here. It is remove cookie. Remove cookie. There you go. And if I go and get the cookie, I have it here, remove the cookie, get cookie, and there you go, bad request. So here also, again, you should check for the key. But we can see in the storage now we don't have it. Then again, we do have it. Then again, we don't have it. So this is how you can remove a cookie. You just let it expire. Now, last but not least, I want to show you message flashing, which is something in Flask that we can do. It is basically you display a message that can be flashed using the flash function, which can be useful if you want to have the field up there on every page for specific status messages. For example, you logged in or some event happened, and this is something you could add in the base template, for example. So the idea is that we have the base template, and in the base template, what I can do is I can add a section in the body, and of course you should style the section properly. I'm not going to style it now, so it's going to look bad. But what we can do here is we can use Jinja with curly brackets %, and I can say with messages being equal to get flashed messages and I can also use an end with. In between, what I can do is I can say if there are messages, and then of course I have to close it off with an end if. If there are messages, I'm gonna iterate over the messages and show them in an unordered list. Again, this is gonna look bad, but if you style it properly, you will have an info box at the top showing relevant messages that have been flashed. So we can say here for message in messages and for we're gonna have a list item with the message. So this is how you display the flashed messages. Now you can flash a message in Flask by just using the flash function. So you import flash, and then let's go ahead now and create a login page. Let's go ahead and say we have an app route/login. And what we do here is we return render template login HTML. So this, of course, needs to be created. Login HTML. There you go. Then we can, or actually, let's go ahead and copy the content of index and just replace this stuff here. Login page, and then the content is going to be a form. So we're going to have a heading 1 login, and we're going to have a simple form, which is going to have an action equal to URL for login, and a method being equal to post. And then we have some basic input, type text, name is going to be username, placeholder is going to be username, then we're going to copy that, we're going to say this is password, this is password, this is password. Then we're going to have an input, type submit, value, login. Very simple. That's basically it. That is our login page. And what we want to do now is we want to go to index when we successfully logged in. But of course, we want to flash the message that we're now successfully logged in or that the login failed, depending on what we do. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to say if request method, and of course we need to allow here for methods being equal to get and to post. So if the method is equal to get, that is the case, just render login HTML. Otherwise, if the method is equal to post, then do the following. Get the value, or the values. Username is equal to request.form.get username. Password is equal to request.form.get password. And then if username equals neural9 and password equals 12345, if that is the case, we return render template index HTML, and the message will be I'm not going to have any message, or actually, let's go ahead and say message is going to be empty, like this. And otherwise, we can copy this and also redirect to index. The only difference now is going to be our message flashing. I'm going to flash, in this case, successful login. And in this case, I'm going to flash login failed. So the flash function is the only difference here, and this is what we display here in the base template at the top. So I can go now, of course, one more time. Let's go ahead and add here the login. There you go. Login, and now I can say neural9, 12345. Login, successful login, and now do something else. Login failed. This is the message flashing. Again, usually you want to style this, you want to design this properly so that you can have just an info field at the top. All right, so we're going to learn how to work with databases in Flask in this video today. And for this, we're going to create a new project or application from scratch because we're going to slightly change the structure of the files and of the code, because in this case here, since we're working with databases and with models, we have to avoid circular imports. Because the idea is, if you have an application file, an app.py file, for example, and you define a database object, and this database object is then used in the models file where you define all the models, and then you also import the models back into the application file, you can end up in an endless circle, in a circular import, and that can cause some issues. So we're going to adjust the structure here. We're going to use a factory pattern. We're going to talk about this here in a second, but first of all, what we need to do is we need to install two packages that we need for working with databases. And for this, you can open up your terminal, of course, use your virtual environment. In this case now, for the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to use my base environment. But you want to do pip or pip3 install flask and then SQLAlchemy and flask-migrate. These are the two packages that you need to install for this video today. Let me zoom in a little bit. There you go. These are the two packages. And once you have them installed, we can go ahead and we can create now a new application directory. Let's call this DB application. And let's create now an app.py file. Now, this app.py file, in order to avoid circular imports, we need to now change the idea a little bit, because what we're going to have here is we're going to have a DB object. Now, let's say this DB object is now an empty string, but this DB object will be needed in another file that we're going to have called models.py. Now, why do we need a models.py file? Think about it that way. In our Flask application, we don't have database tables. We have classes. So for example, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to define a person class. A person can have an ID, a person can have a name, an age, and other attributes, but this is all just a class in Python. In the database, if you're connecting to a SQLite database or to a Postgres database or MySQL database, you are connecting to database tables. Now, what the ORM does, an object relational mapper, which is SQLAlchemy in this case, what it does is it converts, it migrates, so to say, the classes into database tables. It connects the two worlds so that you can work with classes in Flask, and you can basically translate all the actions, all the updates, all the creations, all the insertions, and so on in database language, so that it all ends up in tables, and that you can also select tables and get Python objects as an answer. Now, in order to define that, what we need to do in the models file is we need to create a class and so on, but we also need to import this DB object in the models file. Now, however, once we have the model defined here, we also need to import the model from the models file into the application. And then what happens is you import models and app, you import app and models, and it creates this circular import. So we're going to use a design pattern. I think it's the factory pattern, where we have a function that creates the application. Then we have a separate file called run.py, which is going to run the application. So the basic idea here is we're going to import from Flask, import Flask. From Flask SQLAlchemy, we're going to import SQLAlchemy. And from Flask migrate, we're going to import migrate. These are the imports now. And what we do now is we define a database object. We say db equals SQLAlchemy so that we can import it in models. But then what we do is we create a function which we call createApp. And this function creates the application and returns it as an object, so that it's not always executed when you import this app.py file. Because when you import something, you execute all of the code. However, if it's a function, you don't call the function. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to say equals flask _ name _ template folder equals templates, as we did it before. Now, what we need to do here is we need to configure the string for the SQL database. So I need to say, okay, what am I going to connect to? And we're going to start here with a simple SQLite database, because if it doesn't exist, it's just going to create it. It's the most simple database. If you want to connect this to MySQL or Postgres, you can do that. I can show you how to do that with Postgres. I'm not going to go through the installation of Postgres and setting up Postgres. If you don't have Postgres already running, it's not going to work, but you can connect this to any type of database. So you can say here app.config, and then you have to say SQLAlchemy _ database underscore URI is equal to, and then you need this string. And in the case of a SQLite database, you can use it out of the box already. You can say SQLite and then colon /// and then the path to the database. So if it exists, the path to the database, otherwise just the name of the database. So in this case, we can say current directory, and in this current directory, I want to have a testdb.db, for example. So this would now create a database testdb.db in this directory here. That is the config. Now, what we also do is we say db initialize application, so db init app. And then what we do now is we do a couple of imports. Now, we're not going to do the imports yet because we don't have the stuff written out yet. But what we're going to do here is we're going to import the routes, so the views that we had before, like app route, index, app route, create something, or so on. And we're going to have, in these routes, they're going to import the models, which is, again, where the circular import would happen. But for now, we're going to leave this empty. So we're going to say here imports later on. And then what we want to do is we want to say migrate is equal to migrate app and db. And in the end, we return the application. So what we want to do in our run file is quite simple. All we do in our run file is we say from app import create app. And then we say flask application here is equal to create app. And then we just say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equal to underscore underscore main underscore underscore. If that is the case, just do flask app run host is equal to 0000 and debug equals true. That's that. This is how you run the application. So now instead of running the app py file, we run the run py file. It's as simple as that. So let us move on now to the model. The model is going to be whatever you want to have in the database. So you can either create the database first and then connect your application to the database, or you can also create the database tables using SQLAlchemy and flask-migrate. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say from app import db, and then we can define a class, let's call it person, and this class has to inherit from db.model. So we're defining a database model now. And we need to have a double underscore variable here called table name, like this. And this is basically the name of the table in the database. Let's call our table in the database people. And all you have to do now is you have to define the field. So I can say PID is equal to db.column. And what I do here now is I specify the data type, db integer, for example. And then I can also do some stuff like primary key equals true, which makes the PID the primary key integer column in the database table. Then I can do name equals db column, and then I can say db and then text. Now it depends on the database type what you want to use here. So for example, in the case of SQLite, I think there is only text. You don't have something like varchar or something. But if you're working with Postgres, you might want to do something like string and then, I don't know, 255 or something, or 128. I don't know, whatever you want to do here. But I'm going to keep it simple here with text, and I can say nullable equals false. So it's not allowed to be empty. Then I can do something like age is equal to db column, db integer, and then maybe job is equal to db column, db text, like this. Then I can also define a representation dunder method here, just what happens when I print this, so I can see more information. I can say person with name self.name and age self.age. That is just a string that you get when you print a person object here. All right, now this is a model I have in my application. What I need to do now is I need to somehow create a database. But in order to do that, I first need to use this model in my application. For this, we're going to create a fourth Python file, which is going to be routes.py. You can also call this views.py, it doesn't really matter. And this routes.py here is going to import from Flask render template and request, but it's also going to import from models the person class. And in order, again, to avoid circular imports, we're going to do this now with a function again. So we're going to say def register routes takes the parameter app and db, or the parameters app and db, and to this we pass now the application, and here we can register the route. So we can say app route, and by the way, this is not necessarily the only way you can do that, or even the best way. It's one way you can do that while avoiding circular imports. It's not the only way, and you can try different patterns and different approaches here. But let's just go ahead and say we have the index function, and all we want to do here is we want to say people is equal to person query all. And then maybe I want to print the string version, or actually not print, I want to return the string version of this people result here. That would be now using the model. Now we don't use any of these, but we're going to use them here in a second. Let's also maybe create here a templates directory. But now what I can do is I can go into my application here, and I can say in app.py, in the function, this is important now, I want to do the import in the function. This is how I'm avoiding the circular import. I'm not doing it all the time, I'm doing it when I call the function. So what I do here now is I say import, or actually from routes, import register routes, and then I call register routes with app and db, like this. So I think if I didn't mess up anything, I mean, it's not going to work because we didn't create anything, but I'm not sure if we can even run the application. Let's see. It should probably cause some issue though. There you go, because we don't have a table people. So what we need to do now is we need to somehow migrate this to a database. For this, we're going to open up the terminal in the directory of our project. For this, I'm going to actually open up this terminal here. I'm going to navigate to my working directory, so to current here. Let me just zoom in a little bit. And actually, I'm going to go into DB application. Now here, I'm going to run the following command. flask-db init. Flask-db init. And you can see that this worked. And then I can do flask-db migrate. And then you can see detected added table people. And in order to now actually create the migration, to actually upgrade it, I can say flask-db upgrade. There you go. It's running the upgrade. Now, the important thing is you only do this flask-db init once, and you do the migrate and upgrade every time you make a change in the scheme. Add a new class, add a new model, change a field. You can always do that. Here you have now the database. I can always change something. I can always say I want to have an additional field, or I don't want to have the job field anymore, or I want to change the nullable or the data type. I can do all of that, but I have to migrate and upgrade every single time. So I can open up here this SQLite database. I can open up a connection, and I can say select everything from people. And you will see that I have PID name age job in the database, which is of course great. So now what I can do is I can just run this application, and you can see that I get an empty list, but it loaded all the people from the database because we don't have any people in the database. Now what I can do is I can open up again the connection here, and I can say insert into people, and I can specify the field's name, age, for example, values, and I can say I want to have Mike being 25 years old and maybe Bob being 30 years old. Then I can run this, and then I can say select everything from people again. You can then see I have these entries in the database, and now I can again go run my application. Actually, it was running already. I can open it up, and you can see I have these two people loaded from the database into Flask, mapped into a class. Now I have the objects that I can work with. That's the most simple way to do that. So you have, again, a run file, you have an app file where you have a function that creates the application just in order to avoid circular imports here, because routes, think about it, routes imports models. Models imports from app imports DB from app, and app itself, again, imports routes. Routes imports models, models app, and so on. If we don't do this in a function here, it's going to cause issues. So that's the basic idea. What we're going to do now in this video is we're going to define, or we're not going to define, we're going to create a base template again. We're going to create an index, and we're going to create a details page where we can actually create users, or create people, delete people, and also show more details about the people. So we're going to say here base HTML, and we're going to have the same layout that we had before. So for the title, we're going to have here a block, which is going to be the title block, end block, and the default title is just going to be default. And then here we're going to have a block content, and we're going to end the block. Yeah, that's basically it. Now for the index, what we're going to do is we're going to have index HTML. The index HTML is going to extend this template, extends base.html, and we're going to fill, first of all, the block title with the value index, and we're going to have also the block content. And in here, we're going to put our content, which is going to be a heading, index page, and then we can have, we can list all the people from the database. So we can say, give me an unordered list, and I want to do for person in people, and I want to have a list item here. And this list item will be just the person. And of course, for this to work, I need to pass, first of all, I need to render the HTML, render template, index.html, and I need to pass people, come on. I need to pass people equals to people. So then, there you go. We get all the people from the database. Now, what we want to do is we want to provide a form that allows for the creation of a new person. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say now, heading of size 3, new person. I'm going to create a form. I'm going to say that the action of the form is going to go to URL for index HTML. And we're going to have a post request. So we're going to say method equals post, like this. And of course, for this, we need to adjust the route to also accept post. So methods is going to be equal to get and post. This is all stuff we already covered, nothing new. And we're going to go ahead now and say we're going to have the following fields: input type text, which is going to be the name. Placeholder is also going to be name, and it's going to be required, like this. Then I can copy this, and I can say I want to have also a type number, which is going to be age, with a placeholder age, not going to be required. And we're going to have also a job with a placeholder job, and it's also not required. And then I want to have an input type submit with a value create. All right. So that's quite simple. And I also want to have line breaks here. There you go. So that will not work because we need to say URL for index, not URL for HTML. But now you can see we have this form here. And all I have to do now to use the information of this form and create a new user is I have to go into the route. I have to distinguish between the two cases. So I can say if request.method is equal to get, then just do this. And otherwise, if the request method is equal to post, then what I want to do is I want to create a new entry in the database. How do I do that? First of all, I get all the information from the form. So request.form.getName. I do the same thing for age. I do the same thing for job. Age, job. And then all I have to do is I have to create a new instance of person. So I can say person is equal to person, name's equal to name, age is equal to age, and job is equal to job, like this. What's the problem here? Yeah, of course, we need to typecast this into an integer. There you go. And now this object here, this Python class instance, this Python object basically, I can just add it to the database by saying db.session.add person and db.session.commit. And that is it. So I can just copy these two lines here as well so that I can get, again, the full database table and display it. But that is all you need to create a new database instance. So let me just rerun this. Run it, open it, and then I can say I want to have Sarah, 29, programmer, create. There you go. We have a new instance in the database. I can say John, 89, clerk, something like this. There you go. I can create now new instances, which are also, of course, in the database. They're not just in my Flask application, so I can actually select from people. And you can see that they're part of the database. And this works not only with SQLite, it works with Postgres. So I can easily go ahead now, since I have Postgres configured, I can say create db flask tutorial db. There you go, created it. And now I can change the connection string to be something else. I can easily change it to, let me just copy this, comment this out, and say that the string is now going to be Postgres QL : Postgres, the user, Postgres, the password, very creative, at localhost port 5432 /flask tutorial db. Now I can run the full application again, or actually I need to first, I think I need to, where is it? I need to migrate, so I need to say flask db migrate, flask db upgrade, and then I can just run the application here. So stop and rerun, open. Of course, it's going to be an empty database, but I can create new entries here as well. There you go. Now I'm connected to my Postgres database, not to my SQLite database, and I have a new database with a new table, with new data. This is how easy it is to switch from one database to another one. You can do the same thing with MySQL. You just need to know how to configure the database. Of course, installing Postgres, setting it up might be a little bit more complex, but once you have a database running, you can just easily change the connection string and everything stays the same. I don't need to adjust anything about the model here. Yeah, so that is the basic idea. What we're also going to do now is we're going to create two more routes, and the two more routes are going to be for getting details about a person and deleting a person. So I'm going to say here down below, define delete, and delete is going to be an app route, which is going to be delete, and then we're going to pass a PID, so a person ID. And this is only going to take the method, I want to keep it professional here, delete. So this endpoint will only accept the delete method. And what we pass here is the PID. So we delete a specific user with an ID. And all we have to do in order to accomplish this is we need to say person query filter, and we need to specify which person are we looking for. We're looking for a person with a PID that is equal to PID. And for this person, we want to delete it. There you go. That's it. And again, the only thing that we need to do is we need to commit the session like this. And then we can return render template index.html with probably we should go and say people equals person query all. And then we can say people equals people. As simple as that. So let me just reconnect to the to the SQLite database because we had some data there. Let me just rerun this. What I can do now is I can just go ahead and say /delete 1, for example. Of course, this doesn't work because I'm using a get method when I'm doing it in the browser. So we're not going to do it in the browser. We're going to do it directly as a JavaScript function. So we have this method here, this route here, this function. And what we need to do is we need to send a delete request from the front end. So from the Python, from the HTML file. So we're going to index, and for each entry that I have here, I'm going to add a button or a link, we could say. And this button or link, I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to make it a button. This button is going to call a JavaScript function that takes the ID of the specific person and deletes it. So we're going to say here button, the on click is going to be equal to delete person, and the parameter here is going to be the person.pid. That is what this button does, and the text is going to be just delete. So for every person, we have a button that has an on-click event which calls delete person with the ID of the specific person in this row. Now we need to define this function, so we're going to say script type text JavaScript, and we're going to define the function delete person with PID as a parameter. And what we need to do here is we need to fetch, so we need to send a request. We're going to say I want to send a request to URL for delete. I think this is what we called it, right? Where is it? Routes delete. And we can say also that or actually we should use quotation marks here. We can also say that the PID is equal to PID because that is a URL parameter. We need to pass it here. And then we're going to say plus PID. And I'm going to say here that the function is going to be, or actually the method is going to be delete. Now, please excuse that I'm looking at my second monitor a couple of times. I'm not a JavaScript fan, so I have to double check my code here. But this is what we do. We send a delete request to this URL endpoint. And what we do then is if it was successful, we get the response and we forward it to the if statement, if response is okay. Then we're going to just say window location reload so that we can reload the page and see what happens. So we can see the changes, and otherwise we're going to log into the console an error message, console error, failed to delete item with PID. And we're going to display the PID here. And finally, of course, we're going to say catch if we have any errors here. We're going to say what we want to do is console error during fetching PID, or let's just do it like this, error during fetching, and then we can print the error message as well. So I hope this works. Let me just indent this properly. But the whole magic happens actually here. We're fetching the URL for delete, and we're using a delete method to do that. Yeah, so that's basically it. Let's see if this works now. Let's open up the application and let's press delete. There you go. It deletes the entries from the database. I can create some entries here. Delete. Actually, it doesn't work when I just post it. So let me just load the page again. Delete. There you go. So the entries are now gone from the database. And you can also right-click, inspect, and see that the delete button actually contains the ID. So delete person 4, delete person 2, depending on the row. So this is how you delete the objects. Now, finally, what we want to do is we want to also display some more details. So we want to say app route details, and we want to get the details for a specific person. So for this, we're going to also get here the PID, and we're going to define the details method that takes the PID. And all we're going to do here is we're going to load the person object from the database, and we're going to show the information. So we're going to say person equals person query filter, where the person PID is equal to the PID from the URL. And we get the first of these. It's always going to be 1 since the PID is unique, but in case we have many, we're just going to get the first one. And we're now going to render actually the details HTML, which is going to be a new one, and the person is going to be equal to person, like this. And here now we're going to just copy paste the index. We're going to call it detail.html. I think I used just detail, right? Details, actually. Okay, let's just call it detail then. And here now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say person and then person PID, and I can list some information, something like name, going to be person name, age is going to be person age, and job is going to be person job, like this. And the only thing that we need to do now is we need to add a button, or actually this time we're going to use an anchor tag. So we're going to use a link. For each individual person here, we want to have a link to the details page. So href is going to be URL for details, and the PID is going to be equal to person.PID, like this. And we're going to say that the text for this is going to be details. That should be enough to go to the details page of the respective person. And that's it basically. This is how you work with databases in Flask. This is how you can migrate, how you can use any database basically. The important thing is, again, to avoid circular imports. This is one way to do it with a factory pattern. You have a create app, you have a register routes method, but that is one way to do it. You just have to swap out the connection string here, and you can use any database you like as long as you set it up properly. You define models, you migrate them with flask-db migrate, flask-db upgrade, and that is how you work with databases in Flask. Alright, so we're going to learn how to implement a user authentication system for our Flask application in this video today. And for this, we're going to continue working on the application from last time. Remember, the structure was slightly different because we had a separate run file which calls the create app function, which is defined in the app.py file, where we use this sort of factory pattern in order to avoid circular imports. And basically all we're going to do in this video is we're going to add a class, or we're going to replace the class, depending on what you want to do. You can either replace person and create a user class, or you can just add a user class. You can have multiple classes as well. And we're going to build an authentication system around this user class. So we're going to be able to log in a user, we're going to be able to register or sign up a user, and we're going to be able to keep a user logged in and see which user is sending a request so that we can show different content depending on the type of user or depending on the exact user that is viewing a certain endpoint. So for this, we're going to need an external Python package called flask-login, and we're also going to install another one called flask-bcrypt. And the reason we install flask-bcrypt is because when you have a user and you have user information in the database, like a username and a password, usually you don't want to store the password in clear text in the database. You want to store a hash of the password in the database. And the good thing about a hash is it's a one-way street. So you can take a password, you can hash it, you get something that is very hard to reproduce, almost impossible to reproduce with a given input string, but you cannot reverse it in any way. So you cannot decrypt it. It's not encryption, it's hashing. And this is what bcrypt basically does. So what we're going to do first now is we're going to install the packages. We're going to open up the command line and we're going to type pip or pip3 install flask-login and flask-bcrypt like this. And once you have this installed, we're going to go to our app.py file and we're going to import from flask_login. We're going to import the login manager and from flask_bcrypt, we're going to import bcrypt. Now, let's go ahead and create a user class. Now, in my case here, just to keep it simple and to have a better overview, I'm going to remove the person class. However, you can do everything we do in this video and keep the current functionality from last video. So you can actually keep all the routes, all the models that you have, and you can just add a user model. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just have one class here. So we're going to say class user, and this is obviously going to be a DB model, but it's also going to have something else, and for this we need to import from flask_login the user mixin. This is something that we're going to add here to the inheritance. So we're going to say user mixin here in the parentheses, and then we're just going to do the same thing as with a person. We're going to say table name, let me just zoom in, table name is going to be equal to users, and then we're going to say UID is equal to DB column DB integer and primary key equals true, and then username is going to be a DB column DB string, nullable is going to be equal to false, then we are going to say password is also a string, nullable false, the role is also going to be a string, we're going to keep it simple here, no enums or anything. It's going to be nullable though, and then we can say something like description. You can add whatever you want here. This is basically a user profile. So table name is users. Actually, we don't want to do a comparison here. We want to actually assign this. Description is going to be equal to DB column DB string as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define again the representation dunder method. We're just going to return here a formatted string, maybe with some angle brackets here, and we're going to say user, and the user is going to be, actually, sorry, this is a string. We want to do user, and in here what we want to do is we want to show the username, so self.username, and maybe the role as well, self.role. All right, and one more thing, we want to implement a method getID, which is just going to return self-UID, just so we can access users by ID easily. So that is our user class. Now, of course, we need to do the same thing with migration and upgrading. So we need to open up a terminal. We need to navigate to the directory that we're currently working at, which is here. And then I need to say flask db init, or actually this is gonna, actually not init. We need to use, first of all, we don't need to use init because we already did it. We need to use migrate and upgrade, but also we need to first, of course, sanitize all the code. We need to remove everything that uses the person model, so we can replace this here by user. We can basically get rid of all this. So we can just say return something here. We can also get rid of the detail HTML. In the index, we can get rid of almost everything. Actually, let's get rid of everything. And then here we don't really have anything. Here we have just a model. So now it should probably work. flask-db migrate. Then you can see here, remove table people, added table users, and then flask-db upgrade to actually make changes. There you go. So one thing that you need to understand about flask-login is it doesn't implement any login procedure. It doesn't implement any logic whatsoever when it comes to how you want to log in, whether you want to do it with a password, whether you want to do it with a token, whether you want to do it without any secret or any security measure at all. All that flask-login does is it locks you in, it keeps you logged in, it handles the user that is currently logged in, and it locks you out. How exactly you do that is up to you. So you basically just use the login manager to say, now you're logged in, now you're logged out, and now this is the currently logged in user. How or when you log in a user is up to you. So you need to implement all the logic with comparing the password, hashing the password, and so on. So we have this models.py file now. This is just a user. And what we're going to do now in the application, so in the app PY, is first of all, since we're working with sessions here, this is what we're doing behind the scenes. We're working with sessions. We need to again define a secret key. So app.secretKey, as we did it already in the session management, is going to be equal to something. Of course, here you want to generate a good secret key. I'm just going to use some sample key here, some key. And then what we want to do is we want to create a login manager. So the login manager is going to be equal to login manager. And we also want to say login manager init application. We pass the application. And now what we want to do is we want to define we want to define for the login manager what it means to load a user. So what we do is we say, and here now we define a method inside of a method. So we need to say, let's say the method or the function is going to be called load user based on a given ID. The logic here is to say return user query get UID. And for this, of course, we need to import up here from models import user. Otherwise, we cannot do that. Now, the important thing is this is now just some function here. We need to say that this function is actually how the login manager loads users. So we need to give it an annotation here, login manager dot user loader, like this. This basically now means that when the login manager loads a user, it does it like that. It gives you a user based on a UID. That is how it's done. What we also want to do afterwards here is we want to create a bcrypt object. So bcrypt is going to be equal to bcrypt, and we're going to pass app here as a parameter. And the important thing now is that we also want to pass the bcrypt object to the register route. So we pass here bcrypt to register routes, which is, remember, this function here. So we pass bcrypt here. And we need to do that because, of course, we need to hash passwords when we create users and also hash them when we log in users. So that is important. Now, we're going to leave app PY for now. We're going to add something later on. But now let's go ahead and try to just implement a very basic login. So no password, no fancy stuff, just an endpoint where I can go and I can log in a user and another one where I can log out the currently logged in user. Very simple. For this, let's go ahead and define just a simple endpoint. Let's call it login, and then a PID or UID actually. So I can just go to an endpoint, and when I go to that endpoint, I can just log in a user. How do I do that? Well, all I have to do basically is I have to call the login user function. And this is a function provided by flask-login. So we can say from flask-login import login user. I also have logout user, which I'm going to import. I can also get information about the currently logged in user, so current user. And I can later on, I'm going to import it now, but we're going to use it later on. We can also say that for certain endpoints, a login is required. So we're going to import these four things: login user, logout user, current user, and login required. So all we're going to do here now is we're going to define this login function with PID, or actually UID, as a parameter here. And this function will just log in a user. So we're going to say login user, UID, done. That's it. That's how you log in a user. And then we can return success. And let's say for the index page, what we're going to do is we're going to return current user username as a string. So we just want to know what is the username of the current user. This is what the index endpoint gives us. And then I can copy this and I can say I want to have also a logout endpoint. Log out without any ID. I'm just logging out the current user. And for this, we're going to just say log out user. Very simple, nothing too fancy. Let's run the application and see what happens. So first of all, I have, of course, the problem that there's no logged in user. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to use a try except, or actually let's do it properly. Let's say if current user is authenticated. I think that is the proper Boolean here. We're going to do that. Otherwise, we're going to just return no user is logged in. Let's do it like this. Let's go back no user is logged in. Now let's go to /login. Oh, actually I don't have a user. So let's first of all, before we do anything, go to the database and select everything from users. You can see we have no users. So what we're going to do is we're going to say insert into users. And here we want to have username, password, values. And then I'm going to just say neural9. The password is going to be 12345. I can run this. Then I can run this, and you can see now I have this user. So let's go back. Let's run this, and then let's go /login1. Now what's the problem here? Login user, user is active. String has no attribute is active. What's the problem here? Let me just double check. Login user. Oh, of course, sorry. What we need to do actually, I didn't write this properly. What we need to do is we cannot just log in a user based on the ID. We need to log in a user object. So what we need to do is we cannot just pass the UID. We need to first get the user that has this UID. So user query get UID. And then we can pass the user and log in the user. So let's run this again, or actually it's still running. Let's go /login1, success. Now let's go back to index. There you go, neural9 is logged in, as you can see. Now I can go to /logout, success. Let's go back, and no user is logged in. So this works. You can see that there was no password checking, there was no hashing. All flask-login does is it allows me to log in a user, to log out a user, and to work with the current user and do some stuff with it. But it doesn't say what the authentication process actually has to be. This is what we have to implement ourselves. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just create a basic login system here. So we're going to return render template. Here I'm just going to say index.html. This is going to be the start page, nothing too fancy. We're also not going to do any post requests here. So just a simple endpoint. And then what we want to do is we want to have a sign up. We want to have a login and a log out. So we're going to say app route. And here we're going to say sign up. Methods are going to be obviously get and post because we need to get the form. And then with the form, we can sign up. And here we're going to do now if request method is equal to get, then we're going to return render template, and the template is going to be signup.html. We don't have it yet. Otherwise, if the method is equal to post, we're going to do some stuff. Same is going to be true for login, so I'm going to just copy that, and I'm going to replace this here. We're going to change this to login. We're going to change this to login. And we're going to also load the login HTML. Now, login and signup are going to be very simple HTML files. They're just going to have some basic form with username and password. And that's basically it. Of course, you can also add for the signup maybe the other fields if you want to. I'm not going to do it here now. It's not really complicated to do that. You just add more fields. The important thing that you need to consider is the hashing. So let's say, or actually let's go ahead and first create the sign up. So for the sign up, we literally just need sign up page. We literally just need a form that has an action equal to URL for sign up. Method is going to be equal to post. And the fields here are just going to be type text, name, username, placeholder, username, required equals required, copy, change the type to password, change the name to password, and change the placeholder to password. And then a simple sign up button. Input, type submit, value, sign up. That's quite simple. And that's also what we're going to have in our login page. So actually, this is when we copy paste it, login HTML. This is going to be the same thing. The only difference is we're going to go to login here, and the text is also going to be login. And here, login page. Now maybe you want to add some breaks here for design reasons here as well. But that's basically it. We're done with the HTML part. The interesting part is now, how do we actually create a user? How do we actually hash the password? And for this, we're going to go to the routes again. And here now, if it's a post request, we're going to get username and password from the form. So request form get username, request form get password. And now the important thing is you don't want to store the password in a database. You want to store the hash of the password in a database. So what we do is we hash the password. We say hashed password is equal to bcrypt.generate password hash of password. And then what we do is we say user equals user, username is equal to username, password is equal to hashed password now. And then all we have to do is we have to say db session at this new user, and then db session commit the session. And then we can just redirect. For this, we need to import redirect, of course. We can just redirect to, and we need URL for here as well. You can redirect to index, for example. Which is going to show the current user. Or you can also redirect to a profile page if you want to. It doesn't really matter. You redirect somewhere where you're going to see some information that is specific to the user. In our case, the index HTML file will display the user. So here, what we're going to do, let's do it right away. We're going to say if current user is authenticated, we don't even need to pass it. If that is the case, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to do something else. And then we're going to do end if down here. And what we're going to do here is heading of size 3, hello, current user, username. And otherwise, we're going to just do hello. Like this. So we can easily see if there is a user logged in or logged out. Maybe we should add also 2 links here, pointing to URL for login, like this. And then we should also have one for sign up, and maybe also one for log out. There you go. All right, so this is how you create a new user. This is done. This is the sign up process. Now, how do we log in? Very easy. We do the same thing. We get username and password from the form. We hash the password, so we can actually go and copy paste this. So we get username and password from the form. We hash the password, and then we compare the hashed password that was hashed now from the user input to the hashed password from the database. And if it's the same, we're going to log in the user. So we're going to say user equals user query. And then we're going to use filter, because now we're not going to just get the ID. We're going to say the username has to be equal to the username passed in the form. I want to get the first entry. We're going to assume it's unique. Maybe we should set that up in the model. But I'm just going to get the first user now, and we're going to say, okay, if the password of this user, the hashed password, is the same as the hashed password here, we're going to log in the user. And we're going to do that here by saying if bcrypt check underscore password hash, user password and password. Actually, we don't need a password hash here. We're going to do it like this. If that is the case, we're going to say login user. And we're going to return render template index.html. And otherwise, we're going to return failed, just like this. Okay, so that is the login process. Again, just to repeat, we sign up by getting a form, providing username, password, hashing the password, creating a user with the hashed password in a database, committing the session, showing the index. Maybe we should also redirect here and not just render the template. I think that's better. For the login, what we do is we get, again, username, password. We compare, is there already a user with this username? If yes, get him. Does the password hash match? And if yes, log in the user. Otherwise, just say failed, no user was logged in. And then finally, we're going to have log out, which is just going to log out the user. And we're also going to just redirect to index here. I'm going to keep it simple. So I think this should already work. Let's see if it works. We're going to run it. And now I have sign up, log in, log out. Let's go ahead, sign up. Let's say I want to have a user Mike with password, sign up. There you go. Now I'm not logged in, as you can see. I'm just getting a hello here. I can log in now as Mike with password, log in, hello Mike. Log out, hello, log in. Now for Neural 9, it's not going to work because we didn't have a hash. So maybe I want to create another one, John here. And John will have the password 12345. Sign up. There you go. Log in. John 12345. There you go. Log out. And now if I try, for example, John with some other password, I'm going to get failed. And if I look into the database, you will see that except for the one that I created manually here in the database, you can see that the password is always a hash, not the clear text password. So even if someone hacks the database, they're not going to see the passwords. That is important, of course, for security reasons. All right, so that's almost everything, but I want to show you something else. I want to show you how we can protect certain endpoints, or at least require for certain endpoints that the user is authenticated. So let's say I have an endpoint here, app route, let's call it secret. Yeah, let's call it secret. Def secret is going to be the function, and here we're just going to return my secret message. This is what we get at this endpoint. Nothing fancy here. And of course, what you can also do is you can also check for roles. You can say if the current user role is equal to, and then you can say admin, only then show that. Otherwise, return no permission, but I'm not going to implement this now. This is very simple. You just have to set the role when you sign up or on an edit page. But then you can also check for role. You can do whatever you want here. But the only thing that we want to do is we want to require a login. So what we can do is we can say add login required. And you want to put this below the app definition, before the route definition here. So app route secret, login required. And now we can also go to index and add a link here to secret, and then let's go and run this. Now I'm not logged in. If I try to go to secret, I get this default message. Unauthorized, the server could not verify that you're authorized to access this URL. If I log in now as Mike, what was the password? I think password, log in. I'm now Mike secret, my secret message. Okay, so when I'm logged in, it works. Now, as you saw, when I'm not logged in, I get this default error message. So I can log out, secret, unauthorized. How can I change that? How can I change the behavior of this redirection if I'm not authorized? It's actually quite easy to do that. We just have to go to app.py here, and we have to add a function. And this function will be a callback for this unauthorized scenario. So we're going to say here that the method is called, or the function is called unauthorized callback. And we're going to decide what happens when I'm not unauthorized to visit an endpoint because I'm not logged in. What I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to do redirect URL4 index like this. And of course, we need to import this redirect URL4. And in order to associate this with a login manager, we need to again add a decorator, login manager, unauthorized handler. And yeah, that's basically it. So now when I'm not logged in, I'm going to be redirected to index. So if I try to go to secret, you can see I'm ending up at index. If I log in, mic, password, login, secret, it works. And I can, of course, also do something else. I can also just return some string here, custom behavior. So it's really up to you what you want to do. I can log out, secret, custom behavior. So you can decide that. But yeah, this is how you build an authentication system in Python Flask using flask-login and using flask-bcrypt. Alright, so we're going to learn how to work with blueprints in Flask in this video today. And this is going to make our applications much more professional and much more modular. The main idea behind blueprints is that we take the functionality of our program, we take our application, and we split it up into multiple different components or blueprints, which are for the most part independent of one another. Now, of course, you can still reference them between each other. You can still interact with them. So you can redirect from one blueprint to another one, for example. But the idea is that I can work on blueprint A, you can work on blueprint B, and we don't have to really change the same files. We don't have to constantly interact with one another to merge some differences, because I'm working on the files of blueprint A, you're working on the files of blueprint B, and maybe occasionally we have to adjust some things because I changed the function signature or the name of an endpoint or something. But for the most part, we can work on these separate blueprints, and then all of them are combined into a central application. So you can have one blueprint for a to-do list application or a to-do list blueprint or section, you could say. You can have one for a calendar, you can have one for a habit tracker, you can have one for a login page or for authentication in general. That's the basic idea. And then you can merge all of these blueprints into a central application, and this is just much more structure, and everything is much more modular and professional. Now, because of that, we're going to do everything from scratch here, because we're going to have a different directory structure. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a directory. I'm going to call this now blueprint app. Call this whatever you want. This is going to be our Flask application. And outside of this directory, I want to create a run.py file. And this is important because we're going to use this as a package. So right away, I'm going to say init dot, so __init__.py is going to be placed in that directory to make it a package. Because in all the files, we want to have absolute paths. We want to say blueprint app dot blueprint name dot module dot something, whatever you want to import. You always want to use the absolute name here of the package blueprint app. This is going to be our application. Now, inside of this application, I'm going to have an app.py file. This is going to be our central file where all of this stuff is going to be merged and created. And here what we're going to do is we're going to say from Flask import Flask. Obviously, we're going to also import URL4, or actually I don't think we need that. We don't need URL4, and I also don't think that we need redirect. We're just going to import Flask. We're going to also import from Flask SQLAlchemy, import SQLAlchemy, because of course we're also going to work with models here. So each blueprint will have its own models file, and also its own routes file. So we're going to have everything that we have in an application, we're going to have in a blueprint, other than maybe the database connection itself. And then from flask-migrate, we're going to import migrate. So we do the same thing as before. We create our database object here, and then we define our create app function. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do the same thing as before, create a Flask application. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Create a Flask application, __name, __. The template folder is going to be templates. Now, this is another thing. Each blueprint will have its own template folder. So app is going to be that, app config, even though I don't think we need to have a secret key. But yeah, we need to have, of course, a database connection. So actually, this is not like this. App config like this. And then the field is SQLAlchemy database URI. I'm going to set this equal to SQLite, and then 3 times / current directory /testdb.db, or call this whatever you want. We can call this for this video today blueprints.db, for example. And I don't think we need the secret key, so we're going to skip that. And we're going to say db init application app. And what we want to do then is here in this section, we're going to import and register all blueprints, which we don't have yet. So we don't have any blueprints yet, but here we're going to merge everything together. And once this is done, we're going to say migrate is equal to migrate app.db, and we're going to return the app. And in our run file, this is also not new. We're just going to import that from blueprint app.app import create app. And then flask app is going to be equal to create app. And if __ name __ is equal to __ main __, then we want to do flask app run. Host is going to be 0000, debug equals true. There you go. So this is our run file. You can see we use the absolute path here as well from blueprint app, and that is our app file here. Here we're going to merge everything, but we don't have anything to merge yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our first blueprint. And let's actually just use a to-do list blueprint as an example here. So we're going to create now a directory, which I'm going to call to-dos. This is going to be our to-dos blueprint. And our to-dos blueprint will also, or actually, will it be a package? Let me just double check. Yeah, it will be a package. We're going to also add an init file here as well. To make it a package, just keep it empty. This is just a file that needs to be present. And here now we can create the two files, routes.py and models.py. And this is going to be the structure of each blueprint. So I can create another one here. I can create the blueprint people, for example. And I will do the same thing. I can copy these files. I can put them in here. Of course, the code is going to be a different one later on, but we're going to have models and routes. And then I can make another one. We're going to do 3 blueprints in this video today, which I'm going to call core. Core basically to just be the home page, the default blueprint, which just displays an index page. And here I'm not going to have any models, but I'm going to have also routes, and I'm going to have an init.py file. All right, so these are now 3 blueprints, but we don't really have, or these are going to be our 3 blueprints, but we don't have them yet. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create the to-dos routes file here. So we're going to say from flask import request render template, the usual stuff, redirect URL 4, and then what's new now, blueprint with a capital B. This is a class, blueprint. And then we also want to say from, and now we need the absolute path. Now this is something important. If for some reason your development environment doesn't show you that this is possible, so if I say from blueprint app import db, if that doesn't work, if it somehow says that this is an invalid path or something, chances are you have to right-click your directory, at least in PyCharm, for example, and you have to mark the directory as sources root. Then it should work. Just if you have the problem, in case you have the problem. And then if it doesn't apply right away, you might have to invalidate the caches and restart the application. And maybe we will have to do this here as well. But for now it works. So from blueprint app.blueprints.todos.models import, and here now I'm going to create a to-dos model. So this is nothing new. This is just from blueprint app.app import db. Class is going to be to-do. It's going to be a db model. We did that already. Nothing new here. Table name is going to be equal to to-dos. And the fields are going to be the TID, the to-do ID basically. It's going to be a column. It's going to be an integer. And it's going to be the primary key. Then we're going to say that the to-do title is going to be equal to a column. It's going to be a string. And it's not going to be nullable. And then we're going to just copy this. I'm going to do the same thing for description. But it's going to be nullable. And then maybe done is going to be db column, db boolean. And it's also not going to be nullable because it's either going to be true or false. And then we can just define a representation dunder method here. So we can just return some stuff like angle brackets to do. And then we can use the to do title and whether it's done or not. And of course, you want to have this as an f string here. And then we need also get ID. Even though I'm not sure if we need that or if this was just for the user. I'm not sure right now. Let's just add it here. It won't hurt. And this is now our to-do model, which we want to import here to work with it. And the functionality itself is not going to be too fancy. We did all of the stuff that we're going to do in this blueprint now. We already did, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly. The new thing here is that we now are going to create this as a blueprint. So we don't say app equals Flask. What we do is we say to-dos equals blueprint. And now we have to name the blueprint. It's going to be to-dos. We're going to pass here underscore underscore name underscore underscore. And we're going to define a template folder, which is going to be templates. The same way we did it for the application. So this is what we do for an application. Here we just add a blueprint name. And this is what we're going to register now later on in our app.py file. So this is the blueprint, and I can do the same thing now. To-dos, instead of app.route, to-dos.route, and the default route here is going to be /, and we're going to say that we want to have an index, and all we want to do here is we want to get all the to-dos from the database. So to-do query all, and then return, and we're going to render a template. Now what's important here is the structure or the convention, the best practice way to do it is to create a directory templates here, like this. And then inside of it to use the same name of the blueprint again. So to-dos, templates, to-dos, like this. And here now we place our index HTML file, for example. Now this brings us to another point. We have a base template. Now let's just return an empty string for now to not have an error here. We want to use a base template for all the different blueprints. And because of that, we're going to create also, let's close the blueprints here. We're going to create here in the application itself a directory templates. And this templates directory will contain the base HTML template. Base HTML. Now this one I'm going to copy because I don't want to waste too much time writing code that we have already written before. So that is that. We have again just our simple, actually we don't need this because we don't have Bootstrap, and we also don't need this. But this is basically our blueprint. We have, or not blueprint, our template. We have here the base template with the title and the content block, and then we just fill it up with the other HTML files. And here now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just extend. So I'm going to say here extends base HTML. Nothing new here. We did that before. Also, again, I'm going to fill the block title, end block. The title is going to be to-dos. And then we're going to fill up the block content. And we're going to do end block. And what we want to do now for the index route is we just want to get all the to-dos, and then we want to say return render template. And here now we need to say to-dos / index HTML, because remember we have a to-dos directory in the templates directory itself. And we pass people equals people. Sorry, not people. To-dos equals to-dos, like this. Now, this object we can now use again here and display it. So we can say unordered list, and then I can do for to-do in to-dos and for, and I can just use list items here to show all the to-dos individually, of course. So that is a simple index route. And then just so we have another endpoint here as well, we're going to use a create endpoint. So we're going to say to-dos.route. We're going to say the endpoint is /create. And we're going to allow for methods get and post. I'm going to say create like this. And we're going to say if request method is equal to get. We're going to just return an HTML file. Otherwise, if request.method is equal to post, we're going to do something else. So here I'm just going to return a render template, and I'm going to return a to-dos create.html, which we don't have yet. So I'm going to copy, paste the index HTML. I'm going to call it create. I'm going to delete all this here. And I'm going to have a simple form that I can use here. So I'm going to say h1 create to-do form. Again, I'm rushing through this because all of this we have already done. This is just a repetition. The new thing is the blueprints now. So I'm going to say here URL for todos.create, and method is equal to post. And then we're going to have our fields here. So we're going to have input type text, which is going to be the title of the to-do. So the name is going to be title. The placeholder is going to be title. And required is going to be equal to required. Then we're going to say here input type text description. Come on. Description not required. And then we're going to have a checkbox with the name done. And here we're just going to say in the end done. And finally input type submit, and the value is going to be equal to create. All right, so this is going to be our form. And all we have to do now is we have to get the attributes. Title is going to be equal to request form get title. It's mandatory, so we don't have to check if it's there or not. And for the description, we're going to say request.form get description. And for done, we're going to say it's true if done is in request form keys. So if the checkbox is checked, it's going to be part of the keys, otherwise not. So we want to set it to false if not. And we want to set also the description to null if it's empty. So we're going to say description is equal to description if description is not equal to an empty string, otherwise it's going to be none. So that is that. And then we're just going to create a new to-do like this. We're going to say that the name is equal to name, the description is equal to description, and done is equal to done. And then all we have to do is db session add to-do, db session commit. And of course, we don't need name, we need title. There you go. And then we return a redirect to, and now this is also important, when we do URL for now, we need to say it's not index, it's to-dos index, because we might have another index in another blueprint, and that's a different one, of course. So everything you see here, except for maybe this blueprint line, is stuff that we already did, I think, in 2 videos. And also this is not new, and this is also not new. So all of this is already something that we have done before. Also the model. Now what's new is how to get this into the application. And how we do that is we register the blueprints. So we do that in the create app function. We just go ahead and say from blueprints.app.blueprints.todos.routes import todos. Now todos is not a file. Todos is our todos blueprint that we defined up here. This is what we want to import. And this is also what we want to register. So we have to say now app.register blueprint, and we register our todos blueprint. And the important thing now is you want to associate a prefix with it. So URL underscore prefix, because you will have multiple of those. And what I want to do here, for example, is just /todos. What this means is that in order to get to my index here, I don't have to say just /. I have to say todos /. And to get to create, I cannot just go to URL/create. I have to go to URL/todos/create. That is what the prefix is for. Now I'm not going to run the application yet. We're going to finish all the blueprints before we look at this. And the good thing is that all of this can be easily just copy pasted, at least for the person or for the people blueprints. I'm going to delete all this and I'm going to just copy paste everything here. So from here to, no, just this stuff here, copy and paste. Now somehow it doesn't work, so let me do that in the Files Explorer. To-dos. Seems to be a bit buggy. Now it works. There you go. And all we have to do now is we have to adjust the obvious parts. So for example, the model is not going to be to-dos or to-do. It's going to be person. The table name is going to be people. It's not going to be a TID. It's going to be a PID. It's going to be a name instead of a title. And it's going to be an age, which is going to be an integer instead of the description. And it's going to be a job. It's going to be a job instead of a done, and it's going to be a string. And it's going to be down here a person, and the person will have a name and age like this, and it's going to be a return PID. So that is how we change the model. For the routes, of course, what we need to do is we need to change that it's not the to-dos blueprint, it's the people blueprint. It's not the name to-dos, it's the name people. It's also not import from to-dos models, it's import from people models, and it's going to be import person. Let me just adjust my chair, it's making some noises here. It's going to be the person model. It's not going to be add to-dos route, it's going to be add people route. Down here as well. And here it's not going to be to-dos equals to-do query, it's going to be people equals person query all, and it's going to be not to-dos slash index, it's going to be people slash index, and it's going to be people equals people. We of course also have to rename now here this name. It's not going to be people templates to-dos, it's going to be people templates people. And I think this is now done. Down here we're going to do also people create HTML. And here, of course, we need to also get the different fields. So it's going to be get name. It's going to be age is equal to request form get age. And we have to typecast this into an integer. Again, rushing through it because we already did it. Job is going to be equal to job. And we're going to say that this is going to be job. Job is going to be job if job is not empty, otherwise none. Here we're going to say person is equal to person. And here we're going to say name equals name, age equals age, and job equals job. I'm going to add the person, and we're not redirecting to to-dos index, even though we could do that here. We will redirect to people index. Now, this should already be okay. Now we only have to change these two things. We need to change this to people here. We need to change this to person in people. We need to change this to person. And then for create, we have to adjust a little bit more. First of all, again, people. Create person. Then people create. And then here we want to have name. Name. Then we want to have input type number, age. Then we want to copy this, which is going to be job, and just submit. There you go. So this should be it. Now we have our second blueprint. What do we do to register it? We go to app.py. We say from blueprint app.blueprints.people.routes import the people blueprint, and then register the blueprint people with the prefix /people. So we have in both files here, you can see we have index and create, and they have the same pattern here, but they're different because they have different prefixes. Now, finally, what I want to do is I want to implement the core blueprint, which is not going to be super fancy. It's just going to be a simple HTML file that is rendered by default. So we're going to go here. We're going to create also here a templates directory with another core directory in it. And we're going to copy here the index. And we're going to also copy the routes just so we don't have to write every basic stuff from scratch. But what we're going to do now is we're going to say that the blueprint is called core, not people. And we also don't need to import any models here. So we're just going to call this core. And we're going to have core route, which is going to be index. And this is just going to render the core index HTML, but we're not going to pass any objects. And that is going to be our blueprint. That's it. We don't even need a database. So just like this. And we also don't need all the imports. We just need render template and blueprint. And our index file will do nothing but just link to the two other pages, just so we have a landing page, a home page. So href is going to be URL4. And here now we can say to-dos, index, to-dos, like this. And then we can say here people index for people. And that is actually all I want to do here. I think maybe we can add a heading, h1, homepage or something, and we can say here core, something like this. And now all we have to do is we have to register this and we're done. So since this is going to be our default page, I'm going to say from blueprint app, blueprints, core routes. We're going to import core. And now I'm going to register this. And it's going to have no URL prefix, just a slash. So this is going to be our default index, so to say. Now, of course, what's important is we need to create a database. So let's go ahead and navigate to our current directory. Let's go to blueprint app. Let's do flask-db init. No module named blueprint app blueprints. Why is that the case? Oh, I think this is one thing that I forgot to do. I wanted to place all of them into a blueprints directory, just to have a little bit more of an overview. So blueprints is going to be a directory, and I'm going to copy, or I'm going to move core people and to-dos into this directory. Now, I did this in my prepared code, which is why I did the imports like that, blueprint app, and then blueprints core routes, and not just blueprint app core routes. But now it should work. So we do here flask-db init, flask-db migrate, flask-db upgrade. And once this is done, we can go into our run.py file. We can run it. We can go to our application here. And we can click on to-dos. Now to-dos is empty. Oh, one thing that I wanted to do, maybe this would be useful, is we can go to templates, we can go to index, and we want to have a link that links to URL4 to-dos create. I can copy this into the people index as well, just so we don't have to use the URL bar to make these changes. So let's restart the application, go here, to-dos, create, and now I can say test, whatever, done, create. Stuff, not done, create. There you go. And then we can go back, we can go to people, create, person. There you go. So you can see this works, and this is how we connect all these blueprints. You can see the URL patterns here, people create, and then if I go back, to-dos, and then to-dos create. So this is how we integrate all these blueprints, and this is the core blueprint here. So yeah, this is how you work with blueprints in Flask. This is how you make your applications more modular and professional. All right, so finally we're going to learn how to deploy our Flask application to an actual server on the internet. And we're going to also learn how to containerize our application using Docker in order to do that. Now, when it comes to deploying an application, there are multiple ways in which it can be done. For example, you can also just copy paste all the files, upload them to a Linux server, install all the dependencies and run the application. This is also an option. You can use Docker. You can use Docker in combination with some cloud service. There's not one correct way to do it. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to containerize our application using Docker. We're going to upload the Docker image to a Linux server, which I have rented for this video. We're then going to load the Docker image on the server. We're going to run it there, and then the application is running on the server without us having to install any dependencies, without even having to install Python. We just need Docker on the server, and that's it. Now, if you want to follow along, you will need to have some, or if you want to replicate the results, you will need to have some server that you can work with. So you can either do it locally, you can open up a virtual machine if you don't have an actual server on the internet, you can rent a server, maybe you can find some free alternative. I'm using a paid server that I'm paying for monthly, but you will need to have some SSH access to a Linux server if you want to follow along, if you want to replicate. Otherwise, you can just watch and learn how it's done. So the application that I'm going to deploy today is going to be the blueprint application from last video. So we're not going to add any new code here. We're just going to take this application and deploy it. Now, since we didn't do it properly in the last video, since we didn't use a virtual environment, we're going to create one now just so you see why it's important to have a virtual environment here. So I'm going to open up a terminal down here. I'm going to navigate to current, and I'm going to do the following here. I'm going to say Python 3 -m venv.venv. I'm going to create a virtual environment called .venv. And then I'm going to say source.venv bin and activate. As you can see now, I'm using the environment. And if I try to see which packages I have installed, you can see I have no pip packages installed here. So what I'm going to do here, because we need it for the application, is I'm going to say pip3 install flask SQLAlchemy and flask-migrate. And then this is going to install all the packages. Now, why do we need that? Because we don't need the virtual environment for Docker. We're not going to add this to Docker. We're not going to add the virtual environment to Docker. Why do we need that? Because now, if I have been working on this for maybe months, I will have all the packages relevant for this project in this virtual environment. And I can do pip3 freeze, and I can see all the packages with the versions that I have to make this work. So I want to have these exact versions to have the exact behavior of my application. So what I can do is I can say pip3 freeze, and then requirements.txt. And now what I have here is a requirements file with all the packages and all the versions that I need to make it work on any system, basically. This is the exact configuration I have in my virtual environment with which it works. Now, for the sake of simplicity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete, first of all, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete the database itself, and I'm going to delete the migrations just so I can start from scratch. So the application is still here. We still have all the blueprints, all the files, but we don't have any data already in there. So we're going to deploy an empty application without a database. Now, what do we need to do in order to turn this into a Docker container? What we need is we need to have a so-called Docker file. So I need to go up here to current. I need to right-click, and I need to say Docker file. And this Docker file now will have the instructions that are necessary to build the image, to build the Docker image. So the first thing I want to do is I want to specify the Python version. So I'm going to say from, and then I'm going to say Python 3.10. I'm going to use Slim and Buster here. So this is the Python version that I'm going to use here, 3.10. This is the one that I used during development as well. And now we need to say, okay, what exactly has to be done to make this application work? First of all, let's define a working directory. Let's call the working directory Flask app, like this. What we want to do here is we want to copy the requirements.txt file. So we want to say copy requirements.txt, and the file should be requirements.txt in the container, in the Docker container as well. Once I have requirements.txt in the container, what I want to do is I want to run the following command: pip3 install -r requirements txt. Now, if you don't know that, pip install -r installs the dependencies from a requirements txt file. So it's going to install all these packages with these versions, with these exact versions. Now, once I have all the dependencies installed, I can just go ahead and copy all the files of the application. So I can just do copy everything to everything. So, or current directory to the current directory on the server. So copy everything that's in this directory and place it on the server as well. Now, we don't need the virtual environment. We can delete that. I think it has read only, so I need to delete it in my my files application here. But we copy now all the files, all the blueprints, templates, run file, and all that, also the requirements file. We copy all this into the container, and then we change the work directory to Flask app and then /blueprint app. Now, why do we do that? We do that because we need to run some commands. Remember, since we're working with databases and we don't have the database here, we need to run all these flask-db commands, and we have to run them inside of this directory, because if I run them here, they're not going to have any effect. I have to run them in here where the app.py file is located. So I have to change the working directory, and then I can say run flask-db init, run flask-db migrate, run flask-db upgrade. And then I have to change back to Flask app because, of course, I need to run the following command: Python 3 run py. This is running our application. And that is the Docker file that we need to create our image for our application. So what do? We define a Python version, we define a working directory, we install the requirements, we copy all the files, we go into the application, we do all the flask-db commands, we go back and we run the py file, the run py file. That's basically what we need to do here. Now, in order to actually turn this into an image now, we need to use our command line. So I'm gonna open up my terminal here. I'm gonna navigate to the directory here where the Docker file is located. And now we need to use Docker in order to build the image. Now, the important thing is that you need to have Docker installed. You need to have Docker running in the background. The Docker daemon has to be active. So in case of Docker desktop, you just need to run the application. Then the Docker daemon is going to be up. I'm not going to spend any time here now going through the installation process of Docker or showing you how to get Docker onto your system. First of all, it's not that complicated. Second of all, I think I have a video on this channel already where I do that. I'm only going to show you how you can actually go through the steps that are necessary for deployment. So I expect you to have Docker already on your system. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say Docker build --tag, and we can call this, for example, blueprint Docker or something like this. And we need to pass a dot here because this means that we're using the current directory for this Docker. This Docker process. So there you go. You can see it did all the steps, it ran all the commands, and the Docker image is written. So what I can do now is I can list the Docker images that I have using Docker images, but in my case, I don't need to do that because I know the Docker image name that I provided, the Docker tag, which is blueprint Docker. So I can say Docker run -d -p. Now this is important. We want to map port 5000, depending on which port you used, to port 5000. So the port 5000 in the Docker container should also be the port 5000 on this machine that I'm running this on, and then blueprint Docker. So I run this, and now as a result of that, I should be able to go to localhost 5000 and see my application is running. And I should be able to do all the stuff that I was able to do before. As you can see, my application is running, and it's running as a Docker container. So I can now say Docker PS, what is running. You can see here Ollama seems to be running, and this is also running. So I can just say Docker stop, and I have to provide the container ID, which is this one. I think it's enough to just say something like this, that it recognizes which one I'm talking about. And now if I try to reload, you can see it's down, it's offline, basically. So we do have our Docker image. Ready. Now what we need to do is we need to upload this Docker image to the server. And for that, we need to first save it somewhere. We need to save the Docker image into a tar file. So what we're going to do is we're going to say docker save -o, and now let's call this blueprint docker.tar. And what I want to store here is the blueprint -docker image. So this is going to take a while, and then we're going to create this tar file. There you go. And this is now the file that I want to deploy, or that I want to upload to my server. This is the whole thing. This is my whole application as a Docker image. So in my case here, I do already have an SSH connection to my virtual machine. Now, how do you get this file onto the server? It depends on how you want to do that. Maybe you have some FTP access. The simplest way to do that is to use SCP. So SCP is basically just, let me just zoom in a little bit here. SCP is this command here. You can also use TLDR to see what SCP does. It basically can just upload a file. It can upload whole directories. All you have to do is you have to say SCP, then the file that you want to upload, in my case, blueprint docker.tar, and then you have to specify the host and user. So in my case, it's root at and then the server host. I'm not sure if I'm going to show this here. Maybe you see it right now. Maybe I'm going to censor it. But I'm going to just enter here. I'm going to enter my host, and then you want to specify after the host name colon and then slash the path where you want to store this. Now in my case, I'm here on my server in the root directory, so I want to store it at root and then slash and then also the same name, blueprint docker tar. So this is how you do that. In my case, it's going to ask me for a password now, and it's going to upload the file. As you can see, it's uploading the file to the server now. And once this is done, I'm going to be able to use that file on the server. So I think I should already be able to see it. It's being uploaded here. And then all we have to do is we need to have Docker installed on the server as well. Again, go to Docker installation guide to see how to do that. It's just adding the repository and then installing some dependencies. It's not too complicated. And what you want to do now when this is uploaded, let me just close this here. What you want to do now is you want to say docker load-i blueprint docker.tar. And then I have the blueprint docker image on the system, and I just have to say docker run and then blueprint docker. Or actually not just run, sorry. We need to say docker run, and then what we did before, we need to say -d-p. We want to map again 5000 to 5000, and then blueprint docker like this. And now you can see it's running, and I can go to my server, which is public, which is on the internet now. This is not local anymore, and I can use the application. I can create people. There you go. I can use the application. The Flask application is now deployed on an actual server using a Docker container. And this is how you do that. You just need to have a server, you need to have Docker. As I said, again, what you could do is you can use SCP to just upload all the files, and you can then install all the dependencies using pip. This would also work probably, but that's a more convenient way to do it. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting a like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video, and bye.